That could have gone better. Mass, 67% norm. Energy reserves, 5 cycles non-continuous. After falling down the sewer tunnel I had played dead for a while, however Magenta didn't decide to come down and confirm if I was dead, so I crawled away soon after. I hadn't bothered to immediately repair my disguise, instead I was regrowing the missing parts as slowly as possible to conserve energy. I had however reconfigured my arms into a better arrangement for walking on. Luckily the sewers were easy terrain to get around in, and empty. Left, right, straight, left again, mostly the sewers followed the streets, so telling which way was north wasn't too hard. I wonder why more drones didn't travel here. Sure there was the rats, but they hadn't proven too dangerous. My steps echoed down the barren tunnels as I reviewed the night's activities. The extendable arms and traction claws were proving their worth again and again. They stayed. The bullet-resistant jacket imp gave me hadn't come into play, I'd need to test it later. The speedster defense protocol had worked rather well. It needed fine-tuning for sure, but I had still landed a hit on someone who could dodge bullets. But my decision-making versus Magenta had been somewhat flawed. The description the driver gave me had made me think it was like the Guardian, and while their physical abilities seemed comparable, it definitely hadn't acted like the Guardian. It hadn't stopped to check if the drones in the apartment were okay, or at least not stopped for long, nor had Magenta avoided the use of excessive force, as Tim claimed the Guardian did. Maybe if I had actually bothered to injure the apartment drones that would have halted Magenta, but Imp claimed harming innocent bystanders simply brought down more heat onto you. Bait protocol result, failure. This all came down to my decision to let the driver get away by acting as bait. Next time I wouldn't be bait, I'd just abandon the truck. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision, and logically it was flawed. I guess I put the driver and truck too high in my priorities for some reason. Human.exe shutdown. Human.exe decision-making flawed, calculating. Lost resources estimate, 73.4%. Survival estimate with Human.exe, 87.567%. Survival estimate without Human.exe, 9.284%. Human.exe restart. Oh well, mistakes were made, might as well learn from them and move on. I survived, and that's what's important. I continued down the uniform tunnels. The sewers were pretty great, they were empty, clean, and there was plenty of fresh water flowing through. Supposedly this place was for waste disposal, but I hadn't seen anything beyond a rust stain or two. Too bad, I would have liked to scavenge. Right, left, straight, bloodstain. Well, what have we here? A thin pool of blood was cooling on the floor near a large open pipe. Cautiously I approached and tested it. No, not rat blood, but when I smelled around I definitely caught the scent of rat. Probably too risky to follow the trail that led into the large pipe. I didn't recognize the organism this came from. I wanted more mass, but I had enough resources to remake my disguise for now. Better just to find my way back to Ashwood St before I ran into a bioweapon, or worse. I left the pool of blood behind me, but as I neared the next intersection I began to hear scraping sounds from the pipe I had just left behind. Ducking around the corner, I then extended an eye tendril to see what might emerge from the pipe. The scraping sounds intensified, becoming a scrabbling thump, 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 as whatever was coming down the pipe seemed in a hurry. And I could hear the chittering of rats. The thumping noise built to a climax, and then a new organism I had never seen before burst from the pipe and splashed into the stream of water that ran down the center of the tunnel. Estimated mass, 3.6 drones equivalent. It had a long body that was low to the ground and obviously amphibious. Four stubby legs propelled it at surprising speed, and the length of its body was covered in a patchwork assortment of green and silver scales. At the end of a very long neck that made up almost a third of its length was placed a head that simply extended from the neck, its eyes a milky white with an almost perfectly spherical mouth that was surrounded by thin tentacles. An equally long tail extended behind it, with an attached membrane that helped catch the water and propelled the creature forward in haste. Several deep wounds in its sides leaked blood into the water as it attempted to swim rapidly away. The reason for the creature's distress soon became apparent when a rat leaped out of the pipe after it. This one was one of the larger specimens I had seen, and it was soon followed by two more of its comrades. They chased after the silver scale and followed it into the water. Apparently they were decent swimmers, and in the silver scale's injured state they soon overwhelmed it. They bit it multiple times all over its body, and while it put up a decent fight, it caught one with its tentacles and took a large circular bite out of it. It soon succumbed to its wounds. Soon after, the rats dragged the fresh corpse to solid ground and began feasting. An interesting ecosystem. Apparently the rats weren't just scavengers after all. I'd have to see about hunting those silver scales myself. They didn't look too dangerous if their only defense was the mouth and tentacles. But for now the rats were an easy target, and I could use the mass. One was already injured, and all three of them were tired from the chase and swim. Some manner of shifting would be necessary though. Having only two limbs wasn't good for a fight. My bottom half would take too long to shift, so instead I went with my head. I stored my mask and core in my torso and lengthened the jaw and tongue. The tongue would act as a prehensile appendage for now. Wrapping my tongue around the handle of my knife, I checked around the corner again. The rats were still there and oblivious to my presence, gorging themselves on the silver scale's body. I took the opportunity and charged. The rats hadn't expected an attack right after downing their prey, and I was already on the first one when the others tried to chitter a warning. I stabbed the first one's neck with my knife, but only caused a shallow wound. My tongue was not the best for thrusting a weapon. The other rats charged me and soon I had three of them taking small bites out of me. My one good advantage was that most of the muscle in my arms were intact, and when I landed a blow I tore shreds of flesh from the rats. They reciprocated with bites and scratches, but unlike them I did not suffer blood loss as badly, my wounds coagulating immediately. The rat I had stabbed in the neck was the first to succumb to blood loss, and rather than continue to fight the two survivors ran, surrendering the silver scale kill to me. I didn't bother to chase them. The silver scale was interesting. It was completely adapted to life in the narrow and watery tunnels. Nearly blind due to a lack of light, it probably used the tentacles like whiskers. Strangest of all was its mouth. It had teeth. But if I was analyzing its anatomy correctly, it used the mouth more for scraping or scouring. What kind of organism required that kind of structure? Best I could figure it would latch onto something and bite. But wouldn't most things fight back? Odd. Squeak cuckoo. My head jerked up at the sound. It came from the large pipe and I immediately spotted the two rats I had chased away at the entrance. Both were still bloody from our fight. But behind them were two more rats. Four of them now. Not the worst. At least with two injured. But. Squeak cuckoo. Two more emerged from a smaller pipe farther down the tunnel. Then two more. And another. Each was a large rat. Estimated threat, high. This wasn't good. Not at all. Scree-eek-eek-eek. The next screech echoed down the sewers. Coming not from a pipe but one of the canal tunnels. Around the corner emerged another rat. If it even was a rat. It was massive. Easily and equal to the deceased anomalous yellow fur. Its fur was patchy. And its skin gnarled and scarred from many survived confrontations. Its eyes were the same milky white as the silver scales. But with the way it focused them on me I was certain it could still see. Estimated threat, extreme. Skreekkk. I ran for it. The rats flooding out of tunnels behind me to give chase. Left. Right. Straight. I was forced to simply run as fast as I could down the canal tunnels. Several times rats jumped from adjacent pipes. Or came from side tunnels in attempts to cut me off. I desperately wanted to find an access ladder. But every time I found one, the rats had already formed a barricade using their bodies. Skreekkkkkke. And the giant rat was still behind me. Luckily it wasn't as fast as the yellow fur had been. But the normal rats were fast enough to run ahead of it. And every now and then I had to throw one off, which allowed the massive one to catch up again. Left. Straight. Left. Punch a rat that jumped from an overhead pipe. Right. Straight. Straight. Grab a rat that caught up and fling it into the water. The rats were hurting me. And I was quickly running out of options. While a rough count put the rats at only 30 to 40 individuals, they knew the tunnels better than me. And were using that knowledge to cut me off from any tunnel that promised to give open running ground or a possible escape hatch. I approached an intersection where the rats had barricaded both the straight and left options, leaving the right path free. I wasn't falling for it. Unlike before, I saw light at the end of the straight tunnel. A faint glimmer at the end of the tunnel that pierced the darkness. And the rats had spread themselves just a bit too thin in order to block off both options. I made as if to turn into the right tunnel. But at the last moment charged the rats ahead of me. They had already begun moving to follow me and were now out of position, allowing me to jump past them. One arm actually pressing down onto a rat in order to vault the blockade. The rats quickly realized their error and gave chase. Their clacking claws and chittering squeaks making a terrible racket in the tunnel behind me. A few dozen more feet and I managed to reach the light, finding it to be a series of artificial lights that were strung across the ceiling. They seemed crude and somewhat makeshift. But hopefully I was nearing a drone-populated area where there would be some kind of defenses from the rats. Or at least other targets to distract the rats with. But behind me I heard the screech of the rats die down. The forward runners of the swarm had backed away, refusing to cross the lighted boundary created by the artificial lights. I didn't question my good fortune and kept running. Most likely the rats had learned to avoid drone territory. It's not like they would fare any better against guns and bullets. All I needed was to find an exit hatch and fix my disguise. And maybe I'd live through this. Skreekkkkkke. Or maybe just find an exit hatch. The disguise could wait. The massive gray rat barreled right into the light. And its bravery convinced the smaller rats to continue the hunt. At the very least I had gained some distance. I followed the lights. They continued straight down the tunnel until they split at a T intersection. Which might have once been a normal intersection except that the tunnel straight ahead had collapsed. What looked like melted stone boulders filling in the entirety of the canal and tunnel. I was on the right side of the canal in this tunnel. So I aimed for the right pathway. Rounding the corner revealed a dead end. It continued about 20 feet but ended in a wall of fused and rusted piping. I turned to go back to the left path, but was knocked off my footing by one of the forward runners. It latched to my torso and bit at my face. An unwise decision considering I was still holding the knife in my tongue. And I slashed at it in return. It was surprisingly determined. And took several gashes and a slash across an eye before it finally retreated. I let it go, hoping I wasn't too late. But I was. The forward runners had all crowded the left pathway. And the massive rat was rounding the corner. I was trapped. As a group the rats slowly began to move forward. Some of the smaller rats were probably hesitant, many had injuries inflicted by me during the chase. But the large one was just taking its time. It knew I was trapped. The swarm herded me deeper into the dead end. I wasn't going to be able to break through the mass of rats. And there weren't any pipes big enough to escape into. Transferring my knife into one of my stronger arms, I prepared to put my back to a corner and simply defend. Already my skin was growing thicker as I sacrificed reflexes and flexibility to try and toughen my skin enough to resist the rat's claws and teeth. I doubted it would do much against the massive one though. I kept backing up. One rat got too close and I swiped at it. It flinched back. But the horde kept advancing. Until the last rat entered the tunnel fully. Then there was motion behind the swarm of rats. The blocked tunnel was shifting. Rocks and boulders moving from their positions in concert. Silently. The swarm didn't notice until the first one of them died squealing. Sksh. Heads swiveled as the rats looked to see what had happened. And were greeted by the sight of a rat being torn in half by what appeared to be moving rock snow. Not rocks. But some kind of organism whose carapace blended into the tunnel. The same gray color as the tunnel walls. Without the artificial lighting it would have been nearly invisible in the gloomy tunnels. It had two large claws that gripped the halves of the rat it just killed. And from what I could see a long segmented body supported by multiple pairs of multi-jointed, chitin-covered legs. Between the two large claws I could barely make out a multi-eyed head with only a pair of clawed mandibles for a face. It dropped the rat it had killed and swiped out with a claw. Grabbing another one. A simple twist and flick had the rat neatly bisected and it reached again for a third one. Screek kiki. The massive rat screeched and the swarm attacked. They threw themselves at the creature and died in droves. The press of bodies actually working to their disadvantage. The creature's claws were large and bulky. Perfect for blocking the tunnel. But they were also fast. And single sweeps would crush, slice, and block multiple rats from reaching it. It had blocked the swarm from the intersection and was using the same tactic they had just tried to use on me. Turning the dead-end tunnel into a killing floor. A perfect design and strategy for the tunnels it lived in. I would have been more impressed if I wasn't also caught in the trap. It continued to kill the rats. One of its swipes actually killing 4 rats at once as it simultaneously sliced through one. Grabbed a second. And crushed the final 2 under the weight of the claw. Then the massive rat finally entered the fray. Screek keek. It waited for the swing of the grey claw's arm and charged. Biting onto the arm behind the claw where a wrist would normally be on a drone. Its grapple allowed for multiple rats to finally break past the grey claw's defense. Although several of them were grabbed and killed by the mandibles. Crunch. The massive rat's jaws were stronger than I had anticipated. The crunch was the sound of the grey claw's chitin-covered arm shattering as the massive rat's bite managed to shear through the material. The right claw of the grey claw fell to the floor. And with half of its defenses gone it was soon swarmed by the smaller rats. They attacked its legs, face, and head. But it powered through the onslaught. Swinging its remaining claw into the massive rat and pinning it to the floor. Then it spat a green substance from its mouth right into the massive rat's face. A sizzling sound accompanied the massive rat's screams as it thrashed in agony. The substance quickly eating through the rat's face and dissolving its head in seconds. Hearing their leader scream and die must have demoralized the remaining rats. Because their assault on the grey claw suddenly became a mad free-for-all as they scattered to try and make it past the grey claw to freedom. A few did. But mostly they died as it continued to mop up the few survivors. And then I was alone with it. Its left claw was held high in preparation to swing at any rats that were left. Its multiple eyes scanning the tunnel past the pile of dead rats. And then it saw me and froze. We stared at each other for long moments. Me, desperately trying to figure out the best method to survive. It, probably wondering if I was food like the rats. More moments passed until. Hello, what, can you speak? Are you still human? The voice was coming from somewhere behind the grey claw. It sounded like a sheet drone. Was someone commanding the grey claw? I flooded my jaw with micro units and hurried to shift my mouth enough to reply. Why yesh. 2M human. Was the best I could say with my tongue still swollen into an appendage. Ah. came the voice. You should wear your armbands. Almost thought you were a monster. Suddenly the grey claw moved. Not towards me but backwards. Its many legs scrabbling to reverse itself back into the tunnel it had come from. It pulled the massive dead rat with it as it did so. There was no one else in the tunnel. Was the grey claw actually the drone? I heard. My mind was a list of questions. I hadn't known that drones came in a non-biped design. And this one was a massive divergence from even the other combat drones. Was it made specifically to sweep the sewers? What was its faction? Did it even have a faction? There was a good possibility this was another escaped bioweapon as well. It hadn't attacked me. Maybe I could get more information about the drones from it. I slowly bypassed the heaps of rat corpses and walked back to the intersection. The grey claw was currently sitting in the entrance to its tunnel, and slowly cutting small chunks off the massive rat corpse before eating them one by one. The exit is that way. It interrupted and pointed down the tunnel I hadn't chosen. Make a right at the first intersection and the ladder is right there. Useful to know. But I didn't want to leave just yet. My name is Tofu. Good for you. Now get going. I'm trying to eat here. I don't need to go right away. I replied. I really wanted to ask it questions. I heard a sigh, followed by, yes. You kinda do. It's too dangerous for a small fry like you to be down here. I'll be fine. Pfft. You look like you fell out of a wood chipper. You're just lucky I was here to save you. Well. True. You did save me. But this isn't from the rats. Most of it isn't. I was in a fight and got knocked into the sewers. It was just unfortunate that I ran into the rats right after. The grey claw stared at me silently. Then in a much more concerned tone of voice it spoke. Wait. You mean all those wounds are recent? Jesus, how are you? Your legs. And you already have mutations. You need medical assistance. Like. Immediately. No worries. I feel fine. And I'm not bleeding out or anything. Of course you feel fine, idiot. Did you hit your head? You're mutating. Yelled the grey claw. I flinched back at its yell. Then I asked. Mutating? Yes. God. Maybe you're in shock. I'm sorry for yelling. But you need to reach a doctor before it gets any worse. It's going pretty slowly at least. Your benedicti must be strong. You might have time. Tell me. Do you feel confused and hungry? Yes to both of those. Damn. Here. The grey claw began cutting off smaller chunks of the rat, creating a small pile of meat in front of me. Here. Eat this. I know it's disgusting, but you need nutrition right now. Eat and wait for me here. I'll be right back. Then it withdrew farther into its den. Now I was really confused. At first it had wanted me to leave. But now it wanted me to stay and eat, and it seemed very concerned about this mutating. It was probably related to the mutavis everyone talked about. Maybe I should just ask it directly what mutavis and benedicti are. I was tired of not understanding when drones talked about it. The only reason I hadn't already asked a drone was because every drone already seemed informed. And I didn't want to draw attention to myself for not knowing. I ate my little meat pile. It didn't taste that bad, while I heard clattering and banging from inside the grey claw's den. Along with muffled yells of, "Where are they?" and "Where did I put them?" I finished my meat pile. And was considering eating more of the rat, when the grey claw emerged from its den holding a pair of the yellow armbands in its mandible claws. It threw them to me and said, "Here. Put these on. Do you have a cell phone by any chance?" No. Yeah. I guess that was too much to hope for. Here. It withdrew into its den again and came back out with a cell phone clutched in a mandible claw. I was a bit apprehensive to get close to it, the images of crushed rats were still vividly in my mind. But it hadn't been hostile so far. So I gingerly took the cell phone from its outstretched mandible. When you get to the surface, call 911. Tell them you're mutating rapidly and you need help. Do you think you can climb a ladder without dropping it? Yes. No problem. Alright. Get going. Actually, I wanted to ask you some questions before I left. You don't have time for that. You need to get going. But. Suddenly it raised its remaining claw and with a thundering crash smashed it into the ground. You don't have time for that, it screamed. I had leapt away when it smashed the floor. But when it didn't follow, I turned to look at it again. It was quivering a bit. And I got the impression that it was quite angry with me. Slowly it calmed down. And a few moments of silence passed before it sighed and said, "Look. You need to get going. Before what? Before you end up like me." It finished. Barely loud enough for me to hear. How odd. Why would being an apex predator be bad? You never told me your name, by the way. I said. Pfft. It's Nicole. Try not to break my phone, would you? I won't. See you later. Yeah. Sure. Later. I found the exit hatch easily enough. Fixing up my disguise took a while. But soon I had all my organs and appendages back in place. Even if I was over 100 pounds lighter. I needed to research Mutavis and Benedicti before I visited Nicole again. I wanted to ask her more questions, and I might need to adjust my disguise again to not tip her off. If she wasn't actually a bioweapon, then I couldn't reveal to her that I was. Placing my mask back in place, I was greeted by a floating message in my vision. "Yo Tofu. You alive, imp?" I must have missed the message while I was running from the rats. That's probably one of the reasons they said not to take the mask off. Oops. Side dish number 2. A note from Goggles Bear. Hey all. I've been noticing that it is really hard to avoid profanity in certain situations considering the subject matter of this story. But I've been hesitant to alter the warning labels now that we are this far in. I've added a poll to get a better measure on what you guys would want. Either way. Please enjoy the chapter. Odd Summer. A somewhat innocuous name for what is one of the worst disasters to ever befall our beleaguered planet. Named after the phenomenon's tendency to only occur during the summer months. The phenomenon again reinforces its moniker by occurring on a schedule based on odd numbers. Specifically, events occur between 1, 3, 5, 7, and in one recorded instance, 9 years apart. Which number of years is next in the cycle is apparently random. The cause of this event is unknown. Whether it is a natural occurrence or artificial in nature is unknown. Whether the event is preventable or will ever stop is, unfortunately, unknown. What is known is the effect the phenomenon has on the fauna of Earth. During an odd summer, specific individuals of all species, from the smallest insect to the largest whale, have displayed the ability to suddenly manifest extranormal abilities. When this occurs in a human, we refer to these abilities as superpowers. Flying, breathing water, lifting a simple pencil with your mind, or holding a bolt of lightning as if it were a walking stick. These superpowers run the gamut of human imagination. But despite the ability to hold perhaps the literal power of gods in their hands, I posit that no power held by any organism, animal or human, has ever had a more lasting impact on this planet than that given to the smallest of all, the microorganisms of Earth. Specifically, the symbiotic bacteria Pseudomonas benedicti, commonly known as Benedicti, and the more aggressive yet still symbiotic. Virus named Coactus mutavis. Commonly known as mutavis. Opening to a thesis on postdoc summer microbiology. By Dr. Marcus Mason. Villains. The garage was bustling with activity. Minions going to and fro. Several trucks were being offloaded. And the veteran minions were showing the newbies where all the stolen merchandise went. And how to repack the gear they used. Everyone that went on the mission had returned minus tofu. A fact which had surprised Imp. Normally they lost a few of the black masks on the training run. Mostly to arrests. But sometimes there was an unfortunate death if a security guard got overeager. Or if the job involved rival gangs and villains. Truthfully, this job had gone off a bit too cleanly. Which was good. But it made Imp feel somewhat paranoid. It was rare to have such a clean victory when heroes showed up. Imp's musings were interrupted when his cell phone went off with a distinctive ringtone. He raised his hand to his head. Cell phone already in it thanks to his power. And answered the call. "Hey boss," said Imp. "How is she? How'd she do?" asked Hellion. "Plan went fine. The team did great. Thanks for asking." Imp. "She's fine, Hellion. It was a pretty standard run. Things went better than expected considering a hero turned up." "Good. Glad to hear it. I should be back in about 30 to 40 minutes depending on how long this takes to wrap up." "Wait. You mean you're still over there having trouble?" "Oh please. A few new faces showed up so I've been scoping them out. We'll go over the report when I get back." And with an abrupt click the line went dead. Imp sighed. Sometimes he felt like his job was actually cat herding. Except the cats were tigers. And sometimes they breathed fire. Imp walked around the garage making sure things went smoothly. Giving advice to newbies. Informing the other lieutenants about Hellion's status. And getting the report from the driver of Truck 1. Apparently Magenta had showed up and Tofu baited her away. Imp winced internally. If Magenta caught him they'd be scraping him off the pavement. And Magenta was tenacious. The newbies always made mistakes like that. Stupid kid should have just surrendered and let the lawyers handle it. Imp sent a message to Tofu's mask. But when a minute went by without a reply it was as good a confirmation as any that things had not gone well. He'd have to remember to send a get-well card to the hospital room. Reagan or no, it'd be a long stay considering Magenta's track record. And the kid had bought enough time for the truck to get away. Results mattered. Minutes went by and eventually Imp began making his way to Hellion's office. Sandra and Viper were already there when he arrived. Viper nose deep in her phone as per usual. "Hello, Imp. Glad to see you back in one piece. Lily tells me you had some excitement," said Sandra. "Nothing I couldn't handle," replied Imp. Viper snorted. "Did you even manage to hit him with those pea shooters?" "Hey. Don't diss the revolvers. I'm pretty sure I hit him around 10 times at least." This time Sandra snorted. "Air. Maybe more like 5, okay, twice," amended Imp. Both ladies chuckled this time. They continued to chat about the night's events. Eventually being joined by Rattleback. Who had a few choice words for the amount of ammo Imp wasted trying to shoot a speedster. "They don't grow on trees, Imp." Yeah. Jabs were tossed about in a friendly manner. Jokes were made. Chit-chat continued. Right up until a secret door clicked at the back of the office. With a hiss the wall panel slid open. Out stepped the shadow of a man. Or a man-shaped shadow. It was difficult to tell which. It was somewhat possible to tell that he wore his own skull mask. Similar to Imp's. This one etched to intensify the impression of a human skull. He quickly scanned the room. noting each person in it with the intensity of a trained combatant. "Come on, Smoke. Move it." Suddenly the shadowy man was shoved to the side. From behind him appeared a woman in what had once been an armored crimson bodysuit, but which was now almost completely black from multiple blasts and burns. In some places the suit still smoked. Evidence of the firefight it had just been through. On her head she wore a red mask similar to Imp's, but with a much grander pair of horns that rose from the temples and swept back over her head. And instead of being opaque, the faceplate was completely transparent, with only a golden tinge to tell it apart from normal glass or plastics. After all, she had no reason to hide her face. She was Hellion, the infamous queen of E13. "Hey Hellion. How'd it go with the espada?" said Imp. "Those bozos, who cares how'd my baby do, tell me everything," said Hellion as she plopped down in her office chair and released the locks on her mask, tossing it over her shoulder only for Smoke to catch it before it could impact the wall. Contrary to what one might expect from the pyrokinetic, she did not have red hair. Instead, a curly brown mop of shoulder-length hair flopped out from under the helm. "MS. Hellion. Need I remind you that your promise to not interfere also extends to those times when she is not around?" chastised Sandra. "Fine, fine. You party pooper. Rattleback, would you start us off?" "Sure." Overall the operation was a complete success. Teams 1 through 4 managed to accomplish all mission goals, with only Team 3 having trouble when a vigilante showed up. There were a couple minor injuries, but powered minions on site managed to apprehend him, and his identity and information were recorded before they left him tied up at the scene. The encounter appears to have been a random patrol by the vigilante, and there is no evidence to suggest the vigilante was tipped off to the operation. "Huh. Haven't seen one of those in a while. Was he any good?" "Apparently he was a decent fighter, but he didn't have a power, and no tech backing from the looks of it," answered Rattleback. "Pity. Haven't had a good vigilante in this sector since. What was his name, the guy with the wolf mask?" "Lycanthrope," supplied Sandra. "That's the one. Now that guy was fun." Said several people around the table. Lycanthrope had had a tendency to use tripwire traps, the kind that exploded into a myriad of interesting effects. Many a minion had breathed a sigh of relief when he disappeared. "So anyways, how'd the training run go?" asked Hellion as she leaned forward eagerly. "We had some trouble, but none from the minions, surprisingly," answered Imp. "It helped that Olsen already knew the drill. Ifrit did well. Followed orders to the letter and remembered her training." "Ha! That's my girl," interjected Hellion. "Anyways, Gregor seems like the level-headed sort. He followed orders, asked relevant questions, and wasn't bothered when asked to play the part of big bad mutant. Otherwise not much to say about the guy. I'm for keeping him on. What do you guys think?" Imp asked, directing his question to the other lieutenants. "No problems with his interview. I've already explained the legal risks to him since he can't really hide his identity," said Sandra. "His background checks out," said Viper. "Mutated a year ago after a mugging gone wrong. Subsequently laid off. Reason given as, company downsizing. And moved to East Sector looking for work. One of our recruiters approached him at the unemployment office. Well then. Seems he's a keeper. You can go ahead and finalize his papers, Sandra," said Hellion. Sandra nodded and shuffled some of the files she had with her into a pile. Imp continued. "And lastly we have Tofu. Kid put up a good showing. Turbo roughed up the truck he was in, and he not only kept his focus on getting the truck out, but also managed to injure the guy." "Wait. The shrimp hit turbo? Asked Viper incredulously. Yep. Wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself. That little stunt is what let me drive the hero off. Unfortunately, it was also Tofu's truck that ran into Magenta and he tried to bait her away. Dude has no luck. I sent a message to see if he got out. But I didn't get a reply back. So if we want to keep him on, we'll probably have to extract him legally. Overall, I'd say he's fine for a rookie. No problems on my end. Unfortunately, there is a problem on mine, said Viper. Dude's a complete ghost. No school records. No social media presence. Plenty of missing person reports that match his description. But then there always are. Literally the only evidence we have that he existed before he walked into the interview is Jasper's testimony. And the fact that Tofu brought in a friend of his for an interview as well. A Michael Chavez. Even then. Both Jasper and Michael claimed to have never seen the kid before this week. It wouldn't really be a problem except Adder says he's definitely had plenty of combat experience. Mostly the back alley kind. I'd say the shrimp is a mole if it weren't for the fact no one would make it this obvious. How was his interview? Asked Hellion. It went well actually, replied Sandra. He didn't tell any lies. So at the very least he's not associated with Central. The only odd point was that I needed to explain quite a few terms to him. I think his education is somewhat incomplete. Maybe he is a villain's kid homeschooled as it were, chimed in Rattleback. Ha! Would be kind of funny if we had two villains' kids in the same batch, said Imp. Hellion tapped her gauntlet fingers on the desk in a rhythmic staccato. It's a bit odd that Turbo made a straight dash from the Espada fight right to the training team. Sandra, are you sure there's no chance Tofu is a plant for the heroes? Absolutely. I was able to ask him several important questions, so I got a good read on him. If he's associated with anyone, it's not the heroes. Alright then. We'll keep him on for now. But keep an eye on him. I don't need an angry villain showing up and causing a ruckus because we've let their kid get hurt. Like you would do, said Imp with a chuckle. Hush you. It might be too late for that, said Viper suddenly. She was looking at her phone with wide eyes. Found some footage from tonight that's already making the rounds. She tapped her phone a few times and then turned it to show the whole group. It was some shaky video. Obviously filmed from someone's phone. But you could still easily make out the purplish form of Magenta fighting what appeared to be a mutated human in a mask. The fight was quick. Only a few blows being traded before Magenta had her opponent subdued. You could almost hear them talking. But the recording wasn't high enough quality to make out what they were saying. And then the mutant split in half in a spray of gore. Holy heroes. Christ on a cracker, Magenta. Brick. I swear I didn't do that. I don't know what happened. He just fell apart. This had not been a good night. Brick's team hadn't been able to stop Hellion or her associates from tearing into the Espada gang members after the initial explosion. Turbo had run off alone at some point in the fight and somehow managed to get himself injured, forcing Brick to send Magenta after him. A decision that had now backfired massively. The only good part was that one of the heroes to show up from the nearby sectors had been Hydrox. A relatively new hero with hydrokinesis who had managed to put out most of the fires pretty quickly. Brick and Magenta were now in an emergency meeting with Jerry, their liaison to Central. And he had just finished showing them the video that was already trending on local media. Brick sighed. Alright, Jerry. How bad is this? It looks worse than it actually is. But as you know, appearance matters, answered Jerry. Magenta's headcam confirms her version of events. The culprit threatened to harm civilians. Magenta caught him. And then he bursts like a ripe melon for no apparent reason. Magenta shuddered at the imagery. None of the viscera had dripped past her force field. But she still felt like she needed a dozen hot showers before she'd feel clean again. Jerry continued. Forensics at the scene confirmed that something fishy happened. The bottom half of the perpetrator apparently dissolved into dust and sludge once separated from the rest of him. And upon an examination of the sewer a similar residue was found. But not enough to account for the rest of him. It looks like he pulled a disappearing act. Considering he also didn't look very human while fighting, we're currently thinking it's some kind of Sandman-like or other shape-shifting power. The good news, Magenta, is this clears you of any fault. And your probation isn't currently at risk. Magenta breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing that. What's the bad news? Asked Brick. Well, the public isn't taking the footage too well. Despite all the facts, the video still looks like Magenta ripped some mutant in half. Public opinion seems split between those claiming hero brutality and those claiming the culprit deserved worse. We'll be releasing information to try and quell the worst of it. But it'll be a rocky road before it calms down. I've got the reports on what's being said right here. I'm sorry, Brick, said Magenta. Not your fault, Magenta. You played by the book on this one. Why don't you hit the hay? I'll finish up here. You sure? Yeah. You look like hell and we don't both need to sift through a bunch of hate mail. Thanks, Brick. Magenta trudged to the door and left. Her shoulders noticeably lower than they had been that morning. Brick waited for her footsteps to fade away before he turned back to Jerry. How bad is it really? Jerry frowned and leaned back in his chair, running his hand through his wispy hair in a tired gesture before he responded. Truthfully, Central isn't very worried about the video. The public will whine and moan for a while before they move on to the next outrage. The bigger concern is that Hellions' henchmen hit more than 10 other places tonight. All large burglaries. Brick put his elbows on the table and rested his face in his hands. We're outnumbered here, Jerry. And Central agrees. Which is why you'll be getting some fresh faces soon. Who? I'm not sure on the particulars. Who, Jerry? Jerry sighed before answering. Some new triggers who need training. Brick's fist hit the table, denting the tough metal. Sidekicks, are you serious right now? Jerry Hellion had most of her heavy hitters at that raid, and apparently her goons still had enough manpower to turn away Turbo and Magenta. I'm not sure if you've noticed. But they aren't exactly lightweights themselves. We need veterans. Not snot-nosed recruits. I know. I agree with you. But the fact of the matter is I don't get to have the final word on this. With odd summer starting, Central is being conservative. Things are tight right now. They're always tight. That's true. Which is why you shouldn't snub your nose up at the help you do get. All of the recruits have powers, Brick. They won't be useless. Hellions' henchmen will eat them alive. Hell, E13 by itself might chew them up. You know how it gets here during odd summer. Don't be so sure. Some of them are actually from E13. Brick frowned at that. Isn't it policy to send sidekicks to a sector they don't have families in? Normally, yes. But like I said, things are tight. TCH. Besides, that policy was implemented for safety reasons. And while I hate to give credit to a villain, Hellion is actually far less brutal than most. She doesn't go after families and she doesn't try to kill every hero she sees. This is actually a better area than most for a new hero to start in. She's not above blackmail if she finds your identity, though. I'm trying to be positive, Brick. Look. I know it's not ideal. But Central has promised we'll get all the resources we need to help train them. That includes Tinker support. I'm also going to see if Hydrox would be willing to transfer from E12 to E13. Give us someone who can put out fires. Maybe we can trade him for one of the new recruits or something. Does that untwist your panties? Alright. Alright. I'll give it a chance, Jerry. You've convinced me, said Brick, his frown finally breaking. Glad you see it my way. Now, how serious were you about helping me sort through some of this hate mail? Maybe next time, Jerry. Rain check. I'll hold you to it, Jerry replied with a chuckle. Brick's lightened mood lasted only until the door was closed behind him. Jerry was a good sort for a government guy. Dealt with the dreck. Pulled what resources he could from stingy paper pushers. And tried to keep it all light-hearted besides. But Brick still had one more person to yell at before he could head off himself. And just thinking about it made his blood boil. As he walked down the corridors, Brick gave the impression that he was stomping without actually doing it. It couldn't be helped. He was an even 7 feet tall and built like his namesake. The fact that his power had given him super strength and hardened his skin into a rock-like substance on command had been more a formality than anything. He hadn't even realized he had a power until a week after it happened. Brick arrived at a door marked with a red cross and knocked briefly before pushing it open. Inside he found Turbo out of costume, propped up in a hospital bed with his leg in a cast. "Hey bossman," said Turbo. "Hey Turbo. How's the leg?" asked Brick, taking a seat on a reinforced stool next to the bed. "Could be better. Small fracture. Wouldn't have been too bad, but running on it didn't help none." "How'd it go with Hellion?" "Could have been better. Other heroes finally showed up. But it definitely could have gone better if you had stuck around." "Ah geez. I'm sorry bossman. I just got a call about the robbery and I figured helping the people there would be better than watching a bunch of villains wail on each other. I thought I could solve the problem and be back before I was missed. But one of them boneheads kicks like a mule. Bad luck. You know how it is." "Heh. Yeah, I know how it is," said Brick, right before he grabbed Turbo's injured leg and squeezed. "AHGH. God. What the hell? I ignore a lot of the stunts you pull, Turbo," said Brick. Then he gave another small squeeze. "Og. Bossman. Jesus. Why? I also ignore all the little side deals you run. Like taking bribes to prioritize certain crimes against certain businesses." "Hey. Hey man, I don't AGH, alright. Normally I'd kick you to the curb. But if you hadn't noticed, we're kinda understaffed at the moment. And between all your side gigs you sometimes find the time to actually stop a real crime. But if you ever leave me or a teammate high and dry like that again, I will break all your limbs and stuff you down the nearest sewer myself. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes. Jesus man. Crystal. Good," said Brick. And he finally released Turbo's leg. Brick got up to leave. But before he reached the door he paused and turned back to Turbo. "Oh. Almost forgot. We're going to be getting some sidekicks soon. You spend the most time on the streets. So you can guide them around E13. Show 'em the ropes and all that. I'm not really much for babysitting." "No worries. You'll do fine. Rest up, Turbo. It's going to be a busy summer." "Wait. But." The door closed with a satisfying thump. And as he headed off to hit the hay himself, Brick found his mood had improved quite a bit more than he thought it would. Welp. In a landslide victory the Yays have it. I've updated the tags accordingly. I want corrosive spit. That substance Nicole produced ate through the giant rat's flesh and bone in seconds. The practical applications of such a substance in combat are extensive. Outside of combat I can just use micro units to deconstruct what I want. But inside combat the micro units are simply too slow to use effectively. Plus if the signal gets interrupted, by say a thrashing opponent, then the micro units just self-destruct and it becomes a waste of resources. But a fast-acting solution that can be applied at range invaluable. Although storage is a problem. If the storage organ ruptures in a fight then you are just dousing your own insides with acid. Which would be unpleasant. Nicole obviously stores it somehow. I'll have to ask her about it when I see her again. Maybe she'd be willing to give me a sample either way. I had a lot of information to compile from the night's activities. After I left the sewer I answered the message Imp sent. A few seconds later I received instructions to head to a safe house. Along with a small direction indicator that appeared in the corner of my vision. I began following the indicator at a fast walk. Making sure to scan the sky for any signs of magenta. Meeting her twice in one night wouldn't be pleasant. And I had already had enough potentially lethal events for today. Luckily this late at night the streets were mostly empty. And what few drones I encountered got out of my way in a hurry. The mask really was a good deterrent. Even one of the combat drones, covered in patches of chitin and spikes, crossed the street when it saw me and hurried away. But it wasn't really a combat drone now, was it? Are you still human? Nicole had asked me. Which implied that despite looking like a partially melted and shredded torso at the time, I had still resembled a human. And since she implied I should be wearing armbands like the drones do, it appears that the name of the drone species is human. So, one mystery solved. Not even that big a secret really. The drones constantly used "Hey man" as a generic greeting. Obviously a shortened, slang version of "Hello human." So it appears humans are not arranged into drones/combat drones/progenitors. But instead into drones/progenitors. And due to this mutavis the drones sometimes go through a metamorphosis of human a mutant monster. And I wasn't even that sure about their being progenitors anymore. It was entirely possible they made new drones in a lab similar to the test chambers. After all, most castes seem to be determined by training and not by any biological markers. A very confusing system to decipher. I think my confusion was understandable though. Many cycles ago, back before I received human.exe, I had fought an interesting organism in a combat test. Unlike other organisms that worked singularly or in packs. This one worked as a massive swarm of individual drones that all served the group as a whole. They had 6 legs. A chitinous exoskeleton. Multifaceted eyes. Antennae. And were quite tiny. True. I had been small myself back then. But they still had not been a difficult opponent. I ate the first drones en masse. And when larger, more aggressive soldier drones came, I ate them as well. I followed the trail of drones all the way to the progenitor that made new drones. And then the fight was over. It had been an easy test. And that organism was only presented to me once. But the uniqueness of the encounter had prompted me to record the details. And when I gained human.exe, my observations of the whitecoats prompted me to model them after the tiny chitin drones. The similarities were there. After all. So, one small mystery solved. Now the real mystery is why my best weapon, human.exe, is clearly labeled with the moniker of the most dominant and deadly species I'd come across. True. I'd never seen human written before. But I'd spent nearly a week attending school. And that had been long enough to learn how to match letters with sounds. It couldn't be more obviously labeled. Maybe it was actually a whitecoat program, some kind of puzzle test to see how I would react, but that didn't make sense. If it was, my escape from the test chambers would have been countered in seconds. And the signal that gave me the protocol didn't match that of the whitecoats anyways. So, now my greatest weapon was a protocol of indeterminate origin. Given to me for an unknown purpose. And the entire thing was so clearly labeled a single-celled organism could probably figure out the clues linking it to humans. Odd. So very odd. While mulling over this new information, I eventually reached the safe house, which turned out to be an apartment on the second level of a building that opened when I pressed my mask to the door. Inside was a short hallway that ended in a reinforced door. Approaching the door, a panel near the top opened, and I could see a pair of masked eyes looking out from inside. "Name. Passcode," said the voice. "Tofu. Training team. 0. 4. Up," I replied, stating the passcode I had been given before the mission started. "Wow. You really did survive. Alright. 1 SEC. And the panel closed before the sound of a heavy bolt sliding was heard. The door opened and a minion with a black mask greeted me, extending his hand to shake mine like many humans did. "Wow. You look pretty good for a guy that just got torn in half. You can call me Fred, by the way." "Ha, how did you know about that?" "Oh dude. It's all over the net. We've been watching it on repeat. Magenta's face when she gets sprayed is priceless. Come on. Some of the guys from Team 3 are still up. I'll introduce you." Fred led me into the apartment kitchen, where 2 more minions in black masks, and 1 mutant with metallic platelets embedded in its skin and a powered minion mask, were gathered around the table. They had an assortment of colorful flat rectangles which they appeared to be arranging into specific patterns. Human fondness for rectangles on full display. "Hey guys. Guess who decided to not die?" said Fred. "No way. For real," said one of the black masks. "Ha. Knew it. Pay up," said the mutant. The other minions groaned and threw money over to him. "Heh. Since you survived, this makes tonight's job 100% success. All targets hit. No arrests. And no fatalities. For a job this size, it's goddamn amazing. Hey Fred. Wake the others. We can't be sleeping now. We gotta celebrate," said the mutant. From there the minions started pulling out food and drinks, as well as rousing the others. Apparently they were part of Team 3. One of several of Hellions' teams that had been working tonight. The mutant, who went by Pebbles, handed me a beer. "Ha. This makes you an official bonehead, Tofu. Drink up." "Bonehead?" I asked. "It's because of the masks," answered Pebbles, rapping his knuckles on his own helmet. "They look sorta skullish. And some of the heroes would call us boneheads back in the early days as a joke. Name stuck. And I'll tell you, they don't laugh at the name anymore." The other minions arrived. Groggy and tired at first. But once they realized it was a party and the reason for it, they livened up quickly. Beer was passed out freely. And someone linked their phone to the big screen in the apartment so they could play the footage of my fight against Magenta. It was the only emotion that matches is embarrassing. Apparently someone had used a recording device to capture my fight with Magenta. If you could call it a fight. More like my mad scramble for freedom. But the minions cheered when I hit her with the manhole cover and laughed at the look on her face when she got sprayed with viscera. Luckily the video didn't give away my disguise. I wasn't quite the right shape for a human in the video. But apparently being a regenerator gives me a lot of leeway on how I look during a fight. Or maybe they were just really intoxicated. They don't seem to handle certain alcohol compounds very well. I wonder why they drink them. Then the party went on for a long time. I learned how to play cards, only ending an hour before sunrise. Eventually the only other minion awake was Pebbles. And we were sitting at the kitchen table talking. Heh. That'll teach them to try and outdrink mutants. Pebbles mumbled past his beer. Air. Wait. Rude to assume. Sorry. I never did ask. You a mutant, Wait. You don't gotta answer that. Sorry. Pretty drunk. I don't mind although. What would the difference be? Ha. You're damn right. It doesn't make a difference. Not to Hellion at least. Several drones who were trying to sleep yelled at Pebbles to shut up. And he quieted. Chagrined. I decided to ask again. I wanted a real answer. I was asking seriously. MHM. I mean. I'm a regenerator. But lots of mutants and supers have regeneration. Is there really a difference? Ha. That's a nice way of looking at it, Tofu. But reality ain't so pretty. He took a sip of beer. You can't have both a superpower and a mutation. But both give power. And if you can get power either way, who would want the option that makes you half lobster or spider or whatever? You can't have both. Why is that? What? You want to know? Like. The actual science of it. Shit, I don't know. I didn't pass high school. You want me to explain metaphysics stuff? He paused to take another drink. I'll let you in on what I do know though. Everyone is always hoping they get a power. And dreading getting the virus. But between you and me, Mutavis is probably the better outcome. Odd. That hadn't been my observation at all. Why is that? He took a long swig of his beer and then leaned in towards me. Speaking softly. My old man. Now. He used to be a mean drunk. One night was worse than usual. Beat me into a bloody pulp. Eyes swollen shut. Face was just one large bruise. I'm sure my ribs were busted and worse. He left me on the floor with my head ringing and went to get another drink. I needed a doctor but wasn't gonna get one. That's when this happened. At this he gestured to the skin on his arm. It was thick and leathery. With the small metallic platelets interspersed to provide extra armor and reinforce the flesh. He continued. Mutavis saved my life. True, it hasn't been all peaches and cream since. But I never got beat half to death by my old man again. Mutavis didn't give me amazing supernature, whatever powers. But it gave me exactly what I needed. That's the difference between the virus. And whatever cosmic monkey paw it is that hands out powers. Mutavis gives you what you need and not an inch more. The damn monkey gives you what you want. But I'll tell you. Be careful what you wish for. They can both be cruel bastards. But at least Mutavis doesn't have a sense of humor. Pebbles fell asleep soon after he finished his explanation of Mutavis. He was really drunk. I didn't rest very long. Only until the sun rose. I had too many things on my mind and a long list of small chores I wanted to get done today. So I made myself some coffee and a bagel to go before leaving the safe house. Luckily there was one of those hidden elevators, so I was able to reach the main base without having to navigate above ground. The elevator opened and I exited into the large hallway that housed the elevator doors. Hopefully I would be able to find one of the lieutenants. I wanted to pick up my payment for the job. And I wanted to ask most of them a question or two. I reached the common room where the orientation had taken place. There were a few masked drones about. But it was still pretty empty. Luckily I spotted one of the lieutenants. Sandra was here. Sitting and eating breakfast at a table. I approached and greeted her. Hello Sandra. I wanted to ask a few questions if you have time. Sandra looked at me and blinked a bit before reacting. Then she spoke. Tofu, I admit I didn't expect to see you so soon. Imp said you responded. But I saw the footage of the fight. Are you feeling alright? Yes. I'm fine. Thank you for asking. Sandra gave me a concerned look. Then why are you carrying an empty coffee pot? She asked. I couldn't find a cup large enough to hold all the coffee. I answered. I see. She responded before giving me another look. Was my disguise incorrect? I checked it before I left. Well. I'm glad you're okay then. What can I help you with this morning? I was wondering how to collect payment for the job. Oh. We usually send out the money after everything has been tallied. That takes about a day or two. Is it urgent? Oh. Right. The money. Yes. I could use some money. I was also wondering about the Kobe beef. Imp said we would keep some for ourselves. She gave me another confused look before breaking into a smile. We will be having a company dinner to celebrate tonight. I'll make sure you get a portion. In the meantime, I can set you up with a small cash advance until the paychecks go out. Would a chit be fine? Yes. A chit would be great. Thank you, Sandra. Chits were accepted at Maggie's. You're welcome. You can pick it up in my office later. Was there anything else I can answer for you? Yes. Have you seen Adder or Viper? I wanted to ask them some questions too. Adder is in the training room doing her morning practice. As for Lily, she won't be in for a few more hours. What did you need from her? I wanted her help with a phone. I don't know how to work it. Oh. Well, I'm no Lily. But I'm sure I can help you with that. I pulled out the phone Nicole had given me. I had formed pockets in the right place just for this scenario. Well. I can see why you might have trouble with it. This looks like Tinker Tech tofu. You didn't pull this off a hero, did you? No. It was given to me by someone I met after Magenta injured me. She let me borrow it. All right. But in the future, remember not to trust any tech whose source you don't know. Especially Hero Tech. They always bug their gadgets. I'll remember. Sandra helped me navigate the phone interface. Apparently it wasn't that different from a normal phone on the inside. It just looked rather patchwork on the outside. Thump. I hit the mat again. This was starting to get rather frustrating. Attack pattern calculation failed. I had headed to the training room after talking to Sandra. And there I found Adder going through a training routine. She had seemed surprised that I wanted to practice with her. We started with stretches, some kind of human self-assessment procedure. And then a light jog. But when I mentioned I wanted some combat practice, Adder had been hesitant. Apparently she had seen the video of my fight with Magenta. And was worried that I was pushing myself too hard. I assured her I was fine. And after much convincing, where I used most of the testing machines in the room, she agreed to spar with me. And now I was staring up at the ceiling again. It was very odd. She wasn't stronger than me. And I was sure my reaction speed was top-notch. But consistently she managed to grab and throw me. She kept disappearing right before it happened. Maybe if I sped up my reaction to higher levels. No. That would defeat the purpose of training. I wanted to improve without having to rely on burning resources. Giving up their champ? She asked. No. Just wondering how to counter your power. Pfft. What tofu? I don't have a power. But you disappear right before you grab me. You do it consistently. Ah. Good job, rookie. You've noticed. It's not some power. I just move into the blind spot before I grab you. Blind spot. Yeah. The eye has a small blind spot from where the optic nerve enters the eye. Your brain filters it out since there isn't anything you can do about it. But if you know it's there, you can use it. Human.exe shutdown. Checking. Confirmed. Restarting human.exe. Damn it. She was telling the truth. The human eye has a rather obvious blind spot. But I didn't notice because human.exe was filtering it out. It was an easy fix. But I'd have to be more careful of quirks like that in the future. Can you teach me how to use the blind spot? Sure. But I should warn you, it's more a party trick than anything. Good for making newbies respect their sensei though. She said with a wink. We sparred a bit longer. And I did noticeably better. Although I wasn't quite able to knock her down. She was explaining to me the importance of proper footwork and not just being fast. When the door to the room opened and Rattleback walked in. Morning, Adder. And is that you, Tofu? I didn't think anyone else would be up already. Let alone you. Shouldn't you be recovering? Good morning, Rattleback. And no worries. I've recovered from last night. I answered. He's doing fine, Rattleback. Not everyone is afraid of the sunrise. Said Adder. Grinning. Ha. Easy for you to say, Coach. Some of us actually had to work last night. He replied. Excuses. Excuses. You weren't at last night's job? I asked. No. I don't do the whole skulking around in dark alleys bit. Why not? Well. I don't really like fighting. I don't believe you. Rattleback laughed. It's true, Tofu. She's a terror in the ring. But she wouldn't hurt a fly. Just us poor minions. I'm just trying to toughen you up. Can't have you goons dying out there. She said. Sure, Adder. Whatever helps you sleep at night. He replied. Adder punched his shoulder. To which he just laughed harder, and rubbed his shoulder. Then he continued. Anyways, Tofu. Since you're up early, mind heading over to the garage. Socket saw that footage of your fight and he's been up all night on some kind of tinker bender ever since. Let him know you're okay, would you? Alright. As I left the room, Adder and Rattleback started stretching to do their own sparring. I wasn't sure how much I believed what they said. Would someone who was that good at fighting really not want to fight? Rattleback and Adder started their spar. It was a much more even trade than any of my spars had been. But Adder still threw Rattleback quickly. 13.4 seconds. Ha. I guess if you didn't like fighting. Becoming so good your fights were always short was a viable option. Tofu. There ya are. Get over here. As I entered the garage, Socket spotted me almost immediately. He was over in a corner of the garage where multiple sturdy benches and tables were set up. Most of them laden with equipment of unknown purpose. And a lot of the devices were actively running. There weren't many other minions in the garage. But what few there were gave the area a wide berth. Come times a wastin'. He yelled over the noise of the machines. I wandered over while Socket shut down enough devices that we could hear each other talk. Then he took a stool and gestured for me to sit before he started rustling through piles of what appeared to be clothes. His eyes appeared to be rather bloodshot. Oi. You really put a challenge to me this time, boyo. Been thinking up designs that'll fit your bendy body all night. Here. Try these on fair size. And he threw several articles of clothing at me. They resembled the suits Imp and Ifrit wore. Come. They'll fit over your weirdo skin, I guarantee it. Had to spend half an hour finding a video on the net with enough resolution to see what happened. Nice trick with the pulling in half bit. But you gots ta remember that clothes ain't supposed ta bleed. But don't try that shite again, you hear me? Just get caught next time. We pay a bloody nickel to the damn lawyers, might as well get our money's worth. Now where did I put me cold iron? Error. This guy's compromised. I was stunned. Socket had just casually announced that he had seen through some of my disguise. But he was still putting together a suit for Meihei. Didn't care, maybe he thought it was a power. Hurry it up, lad. You want the suit ready for your next fight or not? And someone get me my cold iron. I spent the next hour trying different suits that Socket had made. Multiple times he yelled at a minion to get some gadget or gizmo. Or through a suit he declared a failure into a scrapper. I was able to squeeze into most of the suits fine. But being full covers, they restricted the movement of my limbs rather heavily. When I mentioned this, he had me display some common movements. And I showed him some stretches and how I made my arms extend, but didn't tell him the extent of my shifting. I wasn't sure how much he actually knew, and I wasn't going to reveal more if it wasn't necessary. Which set off another round of tests. At one point he actually wanted me to put my arm into a saw blade so he could test my regeneration. But luckily a minion stopped him. I definitely didn't want someone with a tinker power getting a good look at the process. Eventually Socket declared that he had collected enough data. And promptly kicked myself and the other minions he had recruited out of his section of the garage so he could work in peace. I made my way back to the elevators in a daze, planning to just go up to Sandra's office and collect my cash advance. At the very least I wanted to get some money out of this whole endeavor before I needed to disappear. Although Socket didn't seem too interested in digging deeper into my disguise. He had displayed a startling level of determination in getting enough info to make the suit. But once he had that, any interest in my secrets ended abruptly. His obsession with solving a mechanical problem was completely overruling his decision-making. And blinded him to possibly important details around him. Baffling. I rode the elevator up to the clothing store entrance. And put away my mask before heading next door to Sandra's office. Inside, Viper was at her desk. Apparently it was late enough in the morning for her to be up now. Surprisingly, she looked up from her phone when I came in. "Hey Tofu. Come here. Sandra left this for you." I approached the desk and Viper handed me a small, flat, rectangular chit. "That's 1,000 there. The rest will be when we send out payments." $1,000. No. Balloons. Of course, dollars, shrimp. Don't spend it all in one place. Mikey was dead asleep when his phone rang. The previous night had been long and difficult. And Turbo showing up had practically given him a heart attack. Between that and the news that Tofu had disappeared, he had thought he'd never be able to sleep again. But once he was back in his home and his own bed, he had promptly conked out. And now his damn phone kept ringing. He let it go to voicemail the first 2 times. But it kept ringing. And finally he admitted defeat. He grabbed his phone off the nightstand and checked the caller ID. It was someone named Nicole. He answered it. Hello, Mikey said groggily. "Mikey, it's Tofu." "Tofu? Shit. What the hell happened, man? Lieutenants said you disappeared. Do you need help?" "No. Magenta tore me in half and some rats almost killed me. But I'm fine now." "What? Anyways, can you meet me at Maggie's diner? Bring Tim. And no worries, I'm paying. I have money now." "Wait. What? What was that about rats?" "I'll explain later. Gotta go. Bye." Click. And the line went dead. The bus arrived and I hung up on Mikey to concentrate on what I was doing. The fact that a bus ride cost as much as a subway ticket meant I hadn't bothered ever using one before. I hadn't wanted to waste money on something that wasn't food. And normally I could just walk since the distances were usually quite manageable. But with $1,000 now in my possession, I decided to splurge. If only for the experience of riding the public bus. Besides, I wanted to get there faster. It was interesting. The interior was designed to be easy to stand in when the seats were full. Much like the subway on a smaller scale. Several seats were reserved for humans that needed more room. Such as mutants. Or caretakers with children. I got to see a child up close for the first time when a caretaker sat in the seat in front of me. Infant humans are unimpressive. It gazed around uncomprehendingly, made incomprehensible noises, and drooled an inordinate amount of liquid onto its surroundings. Perhaps it wasn't truly sentient yet. If that was the case, then maybe in a sense it actually was impressive. Sandra's requirement for being a minion had been 18 cycles. Which meant that in just about 3 weeks this drooling larva would be a fully functioning human. If inexperienced. I myself had been alive much longer and I still needed human.exe to get anywhere close to what could be considered a passable human. The bus let me out about a block from Maggie's. And I hurried. Over. If I was right, then it should be just before the lunch rush. Pushing open the door, the little alarm rang. And the smells of cooking food magnified. The waitress from last time approached me and I asked for a booth since I was expecting Mikey and Tim to arrive eventually. Then she asked if I wanted anything to start with. Yes. Yes, I did. I started with a number 1, tofu burger. Number 2, pancakes with hash browns. A number 3, grilled cheese with fried tomato slices. And a number 4, blueberry biscuits with butter and a side of fruit. My plan was to work my way down as much of the menu as possible before Mikey brought Tim over. The waitress gave me a suspicious look and asked if I had a chit, which I passed over for her to use on the machine before she gave it back to me. Apparently large orders needed to be paid in advance. Which makes sense to me. I finished the first 4 items and began ordering more. It was interesting to see that the cost of each dish was not in direct proportion to the resources I obtained from them. Instead, the cost seemed to be in proportion to what the dish was made from. With fresh fruit being more expensive than items like pancakes. And meat being the most expensive of all. The only 2 items on the menu that contained real meat, number 12, 2 eggs with a choice of 2 bacon strips or sausage links. And number 13, chili and beans, were easily twice the cost of anything else on the menu. It was strange. But it made sense. Since literally everything the humans ate was either nutrient or energy rich. Prices probably reflected the difficulty of obtaining the ingredients rather than the value of the finished product. Meat was self-explanatory. Nothing liked being eaten. And if the rats and yellow fur were any indication, obtaining meat was likely a very risky proposition. What really confused me was the fresh fruit. It was also meat from an organism of some kind. But unlike what I was used to, it seemed grown to be eaten. My biggest clue came from a small green piece of organic tissue attached to a strawberry. I deconstructed it carefully and found it was a respiratory organ. From what I could tell, it used a process nearly the opposite of the human respiratory cycle. So at least now I knew what filtered the air and kept it at a stable mixture. The process would pull mass from the air and stockpile energy in an efficient way, much more efficient than it would be to use micro units to pull mass from the air. But it was slow. And didn't provide a lot of energy. It was useful to know, I guess. But not worth doing when food was so readily available. Maybe the fruit was some kind of lure in order to attract prey and allow the organism to not move. I hadn't seen any organisms that might match such a description yet. Oh well. Another mystery to be solved later. I was accumulating a lot of those. Mikey walked into the diner while I was eating another number 12, bacon and eggs is delicious. And I waved at him to catch his attention. Today he was wearing a black jacket and had his long hair tied back. He looked a bit frazzled. And Tim wasn't with him. "Hey Tofu." He greeted me. "Hello Mikey. Are you alright, and where is Tim?" "Oh. Yeah, I'm fine, man. It was just a later night than I'm used to. I told Tim to meet us here a bit later. Wanted to talk to you about the job first. You can't just drop bombs like that magenta comment and leave me hanging, man." Spill. What happened out there? Over the next half hour I explained what had happened after Turbo attacked the truck. Mikey ordered a burger while he listened. And when I described my fight with Magenta, he pulled out his phone to find the video in question. I might need to get myself a permanent phone later. They seemed like excellent communication tools if the humans were sharing the fight footage so quickly. So. Split in half. Chased by rats. Scorpion chick. That about summed things up, Mikey asked when I finished retelling events. Do scorpions have large claws and chitin exoskeletons? Yeah. And well. Lobsters and crabs and stuff as well, I guess. I'll ask her which one next time I see her. Ack. Don't do that. I dunno about her. But the mutant kids at school always got pissed off if you asked what they were. Oh. I definitely wasn't doing that then. Anyways, Mikey fell silent. Before saying. So like. You actually do have a real power, right? I've never heard of a mutation that lets you do all that stuff. At least. Not while still letting you look normal. Mikey is too perceptive sometimes. I mean. It's cool, man. I get that you wouldn't want to blab about it to everyone. I won't tell. Promise. Thank you, Mikey. We sat in silence for a bit. Just nibbling on our food. Then Mikey spoke again. So what is your power then? Come on. We're friends. You can tell me. Or wait. Don't tell me. Let me try to guess it. Said Mikey with grin. Mikey, I'd rather n. Let's see. You can Regan. Lots of C's can. You can stretch your arms. That's just a quirk of. You held the knife with your tongue, you said. I shouldn't have mentioned th. So I'm gonna guess shapeshifter. What WHAT, shapeshifter is an actual power humans can have. This whole time I could have just said shapeshifter, and no one would have questioned further how. How? Aggravating. Yo. Birth to tofu. You there, did I like? Actually guess it, asked Mikey. Yes. Oh shit. Really? Yes. Heh. Sorry man, I was just trying to tease you a bit. But a shapeshifter power. That's really cool. It is. Yeah man. Being able to be whatever you want sounds amazing. Then he leaned in and grinned at me again. Is that why you're so defensive? You're actually an old neckbeard under there. No. This is how I normally look. Uh-huh. Sure it is. Yes, methinks that thou protests too much. We talked a bit more. Mikey mostly teasing that I was different human types. Such as an old man or little girl. But he also promised to stay mum about my power to others. Not me though. I was going to leak the fact that I was a shapeshifter to anyone who would listen. I should have suspected there was a power that could replicate my abilities much earlier. It even had a name. It explained why Socket hadn't cared that much when he noticed. Finally Mikey interrupted the teasing and looked over at the entrance to the diner. There's Tim. About time, oh God. This again. Tim entered the diner. He was wearing blue jeans and a shirt that had the Guardian's emblem on it. As well as carrying a really large canvas bag that appeared to be quite heavy. We waved to direct him over to our table. And he wandered over before he dropped his bag on the floor with a thump and took a seat. Hey guys. Said Tim. Hello Tim. I replied. Hey Tim. You still trying then? Asked Mikey. Damn right I am. Who knows when the next one will happen? Trying what? I asked. Getting a power man. Duh. Answered Tim. Tim's been trying to get a power every odd summer since we were 10 years old. Mikey explained. Although his methods are somewhat questionable. Wait. 10 years old, recalculating. Main growth phase of human estimated at 18 to 22 years. Danger. Age requirement to be a minion, 18 cycles years. Somewhat annoying. I find out I don't have to hide my ability. And discover I need to hide my age. Hey. The car battery thing was a fluke. Continued Tim. While he pulled out several different devices from the bag. Along with what I recognized from Socket's garage to be a screwdriver. I leaned in. Interested in his process. And these devices will help you gain a power, I asked. Or get him killed. Mikey interjected. Don't listen to this gloomy Gus. Tim said as he started to unscrew the casing on an unidentified device. Statistics show that what you are doing when you trigger matters. If you're fighting some monster you get a physical power like super strength. If you are in a stressy mental situation like being lost in the tunnels you'll probably get a mental power. I'm trying to get a tinker power. So I'm trying to assemble as many devices as I can while Odd Summer is in effect. It's a matter of probability. Interesting. Don't encourage him Tofu, said Mikey. Tim. Has it occurred to you that powers might be completely random? And it's just that the guy in a monster fight who gets a tinker power doesn't live to tell about it. Details. Details. Said Tim. As he continued to disassemble the device and began to switch out pieces. Mikey just rolled his eyes. After hanging out with Tim and Mikey multiple times over the past week I was rather used to their bickering. Tim was always enthusiastic about heroes and powers. And Mikey tended to focus more on the reality of the situation, as he put it. Despite this it seemed they were good friends. Tim ordered a burger, after I told him I was paying since his hero information had helped me win a bet at work, and showed me some of the devices he was working on. They were simple things, his words, such as a small flashlight, a calculator, and a clock. I showed him Nicole's phone while we were on the topic of devices. And he got really excited to see someone else's handmade work. Although I had to explain that it was borrowed from a coworker. And he couldn't look under the hood. Then Tim told me that he knew a place that sold phones for cheap if I wanted one myself. And I told him I'd think about it, phones were apparently expensive. I could buy so much more food. We decided to head to the arcade after lunch. And I went to the counter to pay the rest of the bill. While Tim and Mikey packed up Tim's devices. I went to the cash register and rang the little bell to get service like I had seen other humans do. To my surprise, instead of the waitress, Maggie popped out of the back room and approached the register. Hello. Maggie. I'd like to pay the bill. Of course. Cash or chit wait? Weren't you the boy who came in with Jasper? Yes. That was me. Well I'll be. You're still around then how v you been hun Jasper didn't lead you down the wrong hole somewhere did he? No. His information was quite accurate. It got me a job. She gave me a concerned look before leaning in and whispering. Is it a legitimate job everything? You know. Legal. I had to sign legal papers to get it. She looked very relieved at my statement. Well. That's a relief. And I guess it pays well huh you boys ate enough for 10 people. She said with a smile. Yes. It pays quite well. Maggie used my chit on the register before telling me to wait a sec. Then she went over to a pastry display and took some items out before putting them in a bag and bringing it to me. Here. There's always some room for dessert. On the house. Isn't it in a bag? She laughed. I'm glad things worked out for you. You just stay out of trouble why here, then she handed me the bag. Ah. She was giving them to me. Yes Maggie. And thank you for dessert. I liked dessert. We went to the arcade again. I was growing to like this place. The reflex testers were rather useless for me. But I enjoyed the hypothetical situations some machines displayed. Being presented with dangerous scenarios in a safe environment was great for thinking up countermeasures. It was while Mikey was having trouble with a game named Gremlins and Ghouls that it happened. He got stuck on the 3rd level and Tim pulled out his phone, typing into it a bit before saying, "Alright. Looks like the entrance is behind the staircase. But it needs the red key." Sure enough, Mikey was able to continue once he obtained the red key from a mini-boss. I had to ask. "It gave you the answer that quickly?" "Yeah. It was the first thing when I searched it. Didn't even need to visit the website. Guess lots of people get stuck there." Now I was really curious. I pulled out Nicole's phone and went to the home screen. Sandra had shown me how to make calls and text. But I hadn't been interested in all the other little icons. I clicked one and found it to be a calculator. The next was a list of things I didn't understand. Finally the next one pulled up a blank page. And a section was designated for text. I hesitantly typed in Mutavis and clicked the confirm button. A loading symbol displayed. And then a list of items appeared. At the top was Coactus mutavus. Noun. An infectious disease that causes rapid mutation in those it infects. No known cure. Vector of infection unknown. C. Mutation prevention. Mutavis hotline. Reporting mutant animals. History of Mutavis. It wasn't just a communication device. I typed in Benedicti. Pseudoammonia benedictii. Noun. A symbiotic bacteria that boosts its host's immune system. Can cause additional beneficial effects if the host has high compatibility. Famous for being the only known preventative measure for Mutavis. C. Mutation prevention. Inoculations. Medical resources in your area. History of Benedicti. It was an information depository. Hurriedly I stored the phone in my pocket to hide what I was doing. Pretending to watch Mikey play Gremlins and Ghouls on the outside. On the inside I shifted a bit and was typing in all the things I wanted to know about. But couldn't ask others because it would seem suspicious that I didn't already know about them. Mutavis. Supers. Human anatomy. Fruit. It was all here. It gave definitions. Sources. Even pronunciation instructions. I had spent hours listening in on conversations and trying to decipher the links between spoken words and their spelling. And now it was just handed to me. It was unbelievable. Information on any topic I wanted. As much as I wanted. For free. And humans walked around with these devices. In their pockets. I wanted one. Hey. Timmy changed my mind. Would you be able to show me the store you were talking about? Yeah. Sure. We can go when Mikey loses. Yeah, right. I'm going for the gold. Mikey replied. Mikey didn't complete the game. But he managed to get really far before he died. And we headed out to get myself a cell phone. Tim led us to a store closer to Ashwood St. Named simply Cedric's Hardware. Inside it was messier than I had thought it would be. With shelves of haphazardly placed parts and devices making up the majority of the store. I asked if this store was related to Tinkers and Tim said no. The owner was an engineer. And the store was just a place to buy and trade parts. The human managing the store, not the owner apparently, asked what I was looking for in a phone. I wasn't sure. And both Tim and Mikey were surprised to find I had never owned a cell phone before. The manager pulled out several different phones for me to see. And I quickly realized that I wanted a sturdy one like Nicole's. Hers had extra reinforcement of the case and screen in comparison to the others. And Tim helped me pick one out given that information. $90. 105 including the prepaid time card. Apparently access to the information database was not entirely free. It felt like a large amount to me. But Tim assured me it was a great deal. I had to agree. We hung out a little longer. But eventually Tim had to head home. And Mikey headed off as well. Crazily. Mikey wasn't planning to attend the company dinner, claiming to be too drained from last night's job. He should try to eat more. He probably doesn't keep a big enough reserve. I wandered around until dinner time, fiddling with my new phone. And eventually the time for the dinner to start came close. I headed for the nearest elevator, rushing a bit. All my excitement today had given me an appetite. It was crowded when I entered the main room. Tables had been rearranged to provide maximum seating. And I was reminded of the school cafeteria. Masks were everywhere. And not all of them were minion masks. Most of the unique masks were at a table at the back of the room. But others were spread out in the crowd. I spotted Imp and most of the other newbies. And went to sit at their table. "Hey there, Tofu. Glad to see you didn't bite the big one. You know you could have just surrendered, right?" said Imp. "So I've been told." "Ha. Well, maybe next time you'll remember." I remembered the first time. I just hadn't trusted it. Magenta didn't inspire confidence with her bone-breaking punches. I sat at the table. It was set up so that the food platters would go in the center. And you could just take from the platters instead of getting up to visit a buffet, probably to reduce traffic with such a large gathering. Currently there were chips and various sauces to dip them in. And I began to sample them. As the party continued, I talked with everyone around me. A few of which were minions from other teams. And I got their stories of the job. Apparently things had gone much better for them. The only other team to face trouble was Team 3. And Pebbles had given me their account of the vigilante back at the safe house. Looking up vigilante on my phone, I vowed to avoid them. Attacking villains without a support network. They must be either highly dangerous individuals or dangerously unstable. Neither of which I wanted to deal with. I found out that Ifrit knew about most of the villains in the room. And she pointed them out to both Gregor and myself. Mostly I was interested in the details I couldn't get from my phone. Such as alliances and personality traits. Unsurprisingly, there was little public knowledge about most of them. My phone searches turning up only names and assumed powers in most cases. Hellion was one of the unique masks Ifrit pointed out since Gregor and I hadn't met our boss yet. I took special note of her. And once again, someone put up the footage of my fight on a big screen. Luckily the main focus was actually footage of Hellion and several other villains attacking an Espada stronghold. Taken from a news channel. But my fight was tacked on at the end. It was just as embarrassing as the first time. Especially with Pebbles standing up and shouting in my direction. He may have been drunk already. But finally, the food was brought out. Sandra was true to her word. And a platter of the Kobe beef made its way to my table. I took 2 pieces to start and a few side dishes before I started eating it as slowly as possible. Savoring it. Partway through the meal Hellion got up and delivered a speech. But, to be honest, I was too focused on not gobbling up the Kobe beef to hear it. It was delicious. There was one more thing I had to do for the day. Luckily, I was able to restrain myself from eating all the beef. And I got a bag to take some with me. The safe house elevators turned out to be for jobs and emergencies. Not for casual traveling. So I decided to just navigate my way south from Ashwood St. to find Nicole's sewer entrance. I needed to map this area anyways. With this I would be able to cross off both Tim and Nicole from the list of people I owed lunch. Unfortunately, walking through alleyways with an unmarked bag at night was probably a poor tactical choice on my part. "Hand over the bag and no one gets hurt," said a human as it stepped out in front of me, brandishing a knife. I heard footsteps behind me. And when I checked, 2 other humans had blocked off the alley behind me, with a knife and a length of pipe respectively. Estimated threat, low. I didn't really want to bother with this right now. I was busy. And after eating all day I actually wasn't hungry for once. Is there any chance we could do this later?" It didn't bother responding. Instead, just silently closing in. Oh well. There's always room for dessert. As it turns out. Sometimes there isn't room for dessert. 500 or so pounds of meat simply doesn't compress into the body of an 18-year-old human. I harvested what I could, even increasing my height by 2 more inches and making my fake clothes extra baggy. But in the end I had to throw 2 half-eaten corpses into the nearest dumpster. Such a waste. Even worse was that all 3 of them were non-mutated males. Which meant I wasn't getting any new genetic or anatomical information out of this. Searching the net for information on human anatomy was insightful. But images don't compare to the real thing. Especially since I don't know many of the words for concepts I want to know about. For now I'm simply plugging words I do know in. And using the definitions it provides to search for more words. Having 2 phones for most of the afternoon helped with that. As for the fight itself, I did get some good practice in. I restricted myself to using human fighting methods and just the one arm. I wasn't going to risk putting down the food, in order to keep it challenging. Got stabbed twice in the ribs because of it. But it showed my practice with Adder was worthwhile. I didn't need to burn any extra resources to improve reflexes like I had when fighting the Espada minions on the subway. The biggest problem was actually keeping them from running when they realized they couldn't win. I'd learned my lesson from the rats. No letting them gather reinforcements. Pocketing the knives, they didn't have wallets on them. I went back to searching for the street nearest Nicole's den. It would have been nice if I could use my mask again. But map directions had to be approved by a lieutenant. Something about a security risk. The minion masks had a lot of strange restrictions. And Socket said I could get a real mask if I decided to don the cowl. Absolutely not. My life was dangerous enough as is. And I was quite satisfied with my rewards as a minion. I wandered a few more blocks checking street signs. But I didn't recognize any of them. Then I tried asking for help from what few humans passed by on the street. The responses were disappointing. If they responded at all. The 2 humans who didn't just ignore me or yell at me didn't know the address I was searching for. Seems I just have to look for it myself. The design of Fortress City actually worked against me in this regard. Since everything was arranged into equal blocks of similar buildings, everything tended to look the same. The only real identifiers being where buildings had been modified or damaged. Or where a non-housing structure was placed. I knew the general direction of where I needed to go though. And I headed southwest while keeping a lookout for any landmarks I recognized from my brief time south of Ashwood. I strolled along. Clicking words into the phones. And observing the few humans that were still out and about. Ever since Odd Summer was announced, the streets cleared quickly after sunset. But there was still some activity until it hit the later hours. Some of which were the security soldier caste. Or, cops, as the humans called them. Ahead of me. On the other side of the street. 2 such cops were speaking with a mutant with horns outside of an apartment building. The mutant's face was bloody. And every now and then it gestured up at the apartment while it talked to them. It was getting harder and harder to avoid cops lately. These incidents were becoming more and more commonplace. Tonight especially seemed somewhat bad. This was the 3rd such patrol I had noted. It was a concern for me since there was a curfew in effect. Normally the curfew was ignored. But with this many cops around, it was possible one might stop me. After spotting the fifth patrol, this one currently unoccupied with a prior activity, I ducked into an alley. This was taking longer than I thought it would with all the obstacles. I needed a better method of travel. Streets were no good with the cops everywhere. And alleys were no good with the risk of ambushes. I considered the manhole cover farther down the alley but discarded the idea. If I couldn't find my way above ground, I definitely wouldn't find my way below in the tunnels. I needed to go higher. Not lower. The buildings on either side of me had metal staircases attached to their sides. I checked to make sure no one was around and then stretched an arm out to grab the bottom rung of a ladder. Pulling myself up. From there I climbed up the metal stairs all the way to the roof. I spied the silhouettes of the larger buildings around Ashwood St. and was able to compare them with my internal map. So at least I knew I was heading in the right general direction. As for a route, I measured the distance between the building I was on and the one next to it. It was only about 16 feet. Not a difficult distance to jump. I checked for humans again just in case. But I didn't think this would stand out too much even if I was seen. Now for the first test. I took a running start and jumped to the next roof. It wasn't very difficult. But the extra density I currently carried meant I stumbled upon landing. And only cleared the gap with 3 feet to spare. I made some minor modifications and jumped the next gap. And the next. Making minor modifications after each jump. Using the cement bridges that spanned major streets, I made it 17 blocks before I had to go back to the ground floor to cross to the next building. This was working out much better. I could avoid the more problematic humans and practice designs at the same time. Now all I had to do was figure out how to fold the reversed knee and extra leg length into my normal disguise. Maybe if the tibia sockets with the femur. Crack. I stepped in something. My foot had landed on a round organic object that had been nestled in a bed of shredded paper. Crushing its shell. I hadn't seen it before I jumped because of the waist-high barrier around this roof. Causing me to land on it unknowingly. On the inside it was filled with nutrients. And a small, half-formed organism floated within. Some kind of incubation vessel. I tested the composition and felt relief. It was just an egg. Similar to those served at breakfast. And not a human egg. The definitions from my phone said humans have live young. But with so many mutant variations, I wasn't going to discount the possibility that some laid eggs. I was still getting used to the idea that all women doubled as progenitors. It seemed like an inferior system when compared to having a dedicated progenitor at first. But when I calculated the numbers, I realized that they could effectively double their population count within 3 to 4 years or so at maximum production. And the death of a single progenitor wouldn't put a scratch in those numbers. Obviously some kind of countermeasure towards all the dangerous predators around. Speaking of which, I scanned the rooftop. There was an access door to the next level down. And a few ventilation pipes sticking out of the ceiling. But I saw no signs of life. Whatever had made the eggs wasn't here right now. So I absorbed the rest of the broken egg and crossed the roof to leap to the next building. I almost made it. www. Error, balance decalibrated. Recalibrating. I stumbled and fell to my side right before I could jump. My limbs and balance both malfunctioning. That sound. The warbling cry had thrown my balance completely off. I scanned the vicinity and found what had to be the source. A large unknown organism was perched next to the nest I stepped on. It stood on 2 thin legs with taloned feet. Its head had a strange claw-like mouth with 2 yellow eyes. And its body was covered in dark, scales or maybe fur. They seemed flimsy. At its feet was a dead human. A fresh kill from the looks of it. But currently the kill was ignored in favor of glaring at me. I tried to stand back up but CAWWWWWWWWWWWWWWW. Another warbling cry pierced the air. And again my balance failed me. I tried to avoid falling on my bag of food containers this time. Estimated threat, high. The cry ended, and this time the dark shrieker spread two limbs covered in scale/fur to its sides and flapped them, rising into the air. It dove for me, and I was forced to try and lamely fend it off from my prone position at the edge of the roof. Its talons were sharp, but the organism itself was quite light, which allowed me to bat it away temporarily. I needed to get off the roof and down to the ground level. If this creature could fly, then the flat roof of a building was a bad place to fight it. Peering over the side, I saw there was a metal bar staircase, and I hefted myself over the small barrier to jump down. CAWWWWWWWWWWWWW. I fell down, my malfunctioning limbs barely able to cradle the bag of food as I went tumbling past the staircase and 5 floors down to the bottom of the alley. My modified legs might have been able to take a fall like this, but my malfunctioning joints couldn't position properly, and I hit the ground with a crunch, breaking one leg and parts of my spine. This was one annoying organism. Physically it was inferior, but that cry turned my limbs into limp appendages every time. It came from over here. Quickly. Someone's on the ground. I turned my head to the alley entrance, where 2 humans in security uniforms were running over to me. Great. Cops. Wait. Cops. Great. I could use them as a distraction. Sir. Sir, are you all right? Said one of the cops. Both had their guns drawn, and they were scanning both myself and the surrounding alley for danger. There was a large, flying monster, I said, being careful to wheeze my answer as if critically injured. Don't try to move, don't worry. We'll get you help soon, said one cop, covering the alley while the other started speaking rapidly into a handheld communication device. I was already healing. Bone fractures weren't a difficult fix. What I needed now was to finish recalibrating my balance to rely on vision instead of motion. Around me the world went silent as I destroyed my own sound sensory organs. Hopefully, if I couldn't hear it, the sonic attack wouldn't affect me as much. The 2 cops spotted the dark shrieker first and started to fire upon it, but I could tell the moment when it used its sonic attack again. Both cops fell over in a limp heap, and while it didn't throw my balance off as much, I could still feel the vibration of its cry in my bones, weakening my limbs. I would need to maintain a good distance. Shakily I rose to my feet, the dark shrieker passing overhead as it tried to attack the cops that shot at it. I lunged for the downed cop's position myself and managed to land a good punch on the dark shrieker before it could slash into the first cop with its talons, sending it off course. It almost slammed into a dumpster, but managed to correct its course and gain altitude for another pass. I dived for the guns the cops had dropped. Both of them were still twitching on the floor and couldn't use them anyway. The designs were a bit different for these guns. They appeared to be more advanced versions of the one I had disassembled, but the basics were the same. Grabbing one, I lined it up with the dark shrieker and clicked the trigger. Nothing. I grabbed the second gun and tried again. Nothing. A small panel had lit up when I tried to fire the guns and I checked the displayed symbols. Unauthorized user. Irritating. The dark shrieker passed overhead, and my limbs weakened as it strafed me with its sonic attack. When it circled and dived at me again, I chucked the guns at it. Both hit its face, and in its surprise it forgot to scream as it passed overhead and out of the alley into the street. I needed something heavier I could throw. I lurched to the dumpster nearby and opened the lid. grabbing the first large piece of garbage I saw. Out in the street the dark shrieker circled and came in for another pass. I took aim as it got closer and a purple blur rammed into the side of the dark shrieker, slamming it so hard some of its dark black scale/fur dislodged as they went out of sight around the corner of the building. Magenta. Time for me to leave. I dropped the garbage and ran to the back of the alley. Turned a corner. And then ran until I found a manhole. Pulling it up in a hurry, I dived into the tunnel and slammed the cover closed behind me. Pausing to make sure I wasn't followed. I regenerated the damage from the fight. And slowed down to do some important calculations. Did I owe Magenta lunch? No. I followed the sewers for a while before going back up to the surface. I didn't want to risk getting lost or running into any more rats. True, there was the risk of Magenta and cops. But changing my coverings and face should keep them from recognizing me as the person the dark shrieker was targeting. The surface had its risks. But so far the ground floor and especially the alleys had proven to be the least dangerous of my options. I should have stuck with them from the beginning. I alternated between the sidewalks and alleys as necessary, trying not to attract notice, and just observing the nighttime activities of humans. Through one apartment window I saw a group of males around a screen that showed some sort of training exercise. Over at a street corner was a Texas taco stand, a mobile dispensary where humans were occasionally stopping and getting food. I bought one. Tacos are tasty. One large building had a line of interestingly dressed humans waiting to get inside, where loud noises were creating a rhythmic pattern. All of these different places and people I had never seen before told me one thing. I was kinda lost. The taco vendor had told me I was going in the right general direction, but I still hadn't seen any street signs I recognized. I decided to climb to the roof of a building, carefully, and check the skyline of Ashwood St. Again. Yep. I was going in the right general direction. Maybe 30 to 40 more blocks before I crossed the route I took to the safe house. That wasn't so bad. As long as this really was the right direction and I wasn't more turned around than I thought I was. I climbed down the metal staircase slowly, being careful to not spill the contents of my bag. After all the night's activities it had started to develop a few holes and seemed a bit fragile. I started to gather mass to make a temporary pouch while I climbed down. As I dropped from the bottom rung of the last ladder, a small metal canister flew out from behind a dumpster. It landed right in front of me and exploded, creating a flash of light and noise so loud they damaged my sensory organs. I fell into a crouch and tried to run towards where I remembered some cover being. But a spray of shrapnel pellets caught me in the head. Error, human.exe has crashed. Hardware destroyed. Estimated threat, extreme. Emergency protocol, PD. The creature collapsed, the bag it carried dropping to the floor of the alley as it flopped forwards onto the ground. It twitched a bit as blood spurted from the crater of its face, propelled by the last few beats of its hearts. A man rose up from behind the dumpster, dressed in dark clothing, with a red bandana hiding the lower half of his face. But his eyes glowed as they centered in on the creature he had been tracking all night. It wasn't wearing armbands. But even if it had, the half-eaten bodies he came across in a dumpster sealed its fate. Monster or cannibal, a man-eater couldn't be suffered to live. Not in his sector. Not by him. He raised his pump-action shotgun and emptied the rest of his ammo into its torso. Never a good idea to hold back on odd summer horrors. He maintained a distance from the corpse, reloading his shotgun. Its torso looked like hamburger meat now. But sometimes these monsters regenerated on you. He waited 10 minutes for the blood to stop flowing and confirm it wasn't regenerating. Finally satisfied, he relaxed his posture and turned to head back to his bike. He needed to call this in so the Seas wouldn't waste time investigating a monster corpse. The moment he turned fully, tendons and muscles that had been regenerating and tensing under a dense layer of protective flesh snapped into motion, propelling the corpse of the monster forward, while its outer layers were pulverized. Its innermost skeletal and muscle systems had been largely protected by its stockpiled mass. Its arms snapped forward, embedding 2 knives deep into the shoulders of the human. He screamed and tried to turn his shotgun, but his arms no longer listened to him. The monster tore the shotgun from his hands and flung it into the same dumpster the human had hidden behind. Then it turned him around and slammed him into the wall of the building next to them. He tried to kick at it, but it just took a third knife and stabbed it into his leg above the knee, eliciting another scream. The monster's broken head scanned the alley. Then it turned the crater of its face towards the human, and he wished it hadn't. Inside the crater was a tiny cluster of eyes that stared back at him. Seconds passed. Ordeal. What? The sound had come from the creature, but its vocal apparatuses were still too damaged to form real sounds. It waited a few moments for the micro-units to work, then tried again. Others. The creature made another scan of the alley and after a minute determined this was most likely a lie. It wasn't used to dealing with humans without the filter of human.exe. But the hardware for it would take a while to fix. At least the helmet/mask had protected its core perfectly. Why attack? It asked the human. Why, you killed 3 people, you psycho zombie. The creature took another minute to analyze the statement while the human gasped for breath. Yes. The death of other humans seemed to concern humans. This matched its knowledge base. How track? It scanned the alley again while it tried to decipher the confusing response, until its gaze landed on the spilled bag of food. Its head turned back to the human slowly, with regained purpose. You spilled my food. Oh. So you can actually make a complete sentence. Well. Why don't you take those 2 brain cells and shove them right up your AFFFLGHR? His words were cut off by the creature's hand covering his mouth. It leaned in to make sure the troublesome human understood its next words fully. Pay me back. I was in a really bad mood. All night I had been attacked over and over. I almost ran into Magenta again. Apparently the vigilante had tracked me using a power. Because eating his eyes hadn't revealed any usable structures or genetic code. Attacking people with just a tracking power. And it called me a psycho. I accidentally broke the shotgun when I hurled it into the dumpster. I was still lost. And, worst of all, one of the shotgun pellets had punctured the container that held the sauce for the beef. It had leaked into a sewer grate before I realized what had happened. If it had at least spilled on the ground, I could have tried to filter it. I trudged down the sidewalk. It was getting really late. I hadn't seen other walking humans in a while now. And I was desperate enough to ask a cop for directions at this point. If I could find one. Finally, one of the buildings I passed was open. A dark side bar and grill. Outside the building were many 2-wheeled transport devices. And from inside I could hear lots of laughter and more rhythmic sound patterns. I approached it and entered. Inside the bar were lots of humans and combat model mutants. They were drinking, playing cards. And in one corner 2 males were having a contest of strength with their right arms while others cheered them on. They wore lots of interesting clothes too. But I noticed a theme of leather jackets, jeans, bandanas. Lots of tattoos. Having a way to look up words is great. And most of their jackets had the name Darksiders printed on them somewhere. Maybe these were minions of a different supervillain. Surely they could help me. Excuse me. Excuse me. I'm really lost. Would any of you be able to give me directions to Mansionil St? The bar quieted quickly as the humans turned to me. The closest one replied. Yeah. You're definitely in the wrong neighborhood, buddy. The two motorcycles came to a stop next to the sidewalk. And I hopped off the back of the one I was riding. Then I clicked the strap of my borrowed helmet and handed it back to the biker who had driven me to the street I needed. Thank you for transporting me, Teddy. No problem, amigo. Can't believe you were thinking of walking. Streets are crazy right now. Yes. That was probably a bad idea on my part. The two bikers said their goodbyes and left. And I headed for the manhole cover that would lead to Nicole's den. I would definitely have to visit that bar again. I descended into the sewer and headed to the lighted section that marked Nicole's den, making sure to change my face to the way it normally looked on the way. Looking ahead down the tunnel, I didn't see Nicole. But I heard some familiar clacking noises coming from the tunnel I had originally used to reach her intersection. Sure enough, Nicole's claw appeared from around the corner, slowly followed by the rest of her front half. She appeared to be carrying something. And I was glad to see that her missing claw was regenerating slowly. Hello, Nicole. I yelled down the tunnel. She halted in surprise before she could completely exit the passage. Then yelled out. Who's there? It's me. Tofu. I replied. Tofu? You're back. And you look fine. She paused for a second. Turn around. What? Turn around. Why? 'Cause I said so. And don't peek. I didn't understand. But I did what she asked. From behind me I heard scuttling and scraping as she hurriedly returned to her den tunnel. Now it made sense. She was an ambush predator designed for narrow tunnels. And I had caught her outside her den. She probably felt vulnerable. All right. You can turn around, she said. I turned and approached her. Hi, Nicole. You're looking much better. Look who's talking. Did an actual super help you? She asked. I got some help. But not for the injuries. I regenerated those. I'm a shapeshifter. Oh, so why didn't you say that last time? I was confused from blood loss. But here. I brought back your phone and armbands. Thank you for loaning them to me. They were quite helpful. I replied as I handed her items back to her. I also brought some food as thanks for saving me from the rats. Here. And I handed her the bag of food. The bikers had given me a new bag since mine was falling apart. Such nice people. She held the items and stared at the bag of food strangely before saying, Thank you. Let me just put these away real quick. And withdrew into her den, emerging soon after empty-handed. Did you already eat it? That was really fast. Oh. No. I stored it away for later. I've already eaten dinner. Thank you though. I'm sure it's delicious. She replied. Oh right. She had the rat corpses to eat. And I took so long getting here. Yeah. Sorry I'm intruding so late. I had a really hard time finding this place again. Oh. Did my phone run out of batteries? She asked. No. What did batteries have to do with it? It was just difficult to locate. Like. You couldn't remember the address. I remembered it. So. Why didn't you look up a map? She asked. I did. Or tried to. But all it did was give me the definition of what a map was when I typed it in. There was a very long pause before she spoke again. Tofu. I mean GPS. Was it completely down or something? Why not use that? GPS, and then when you're done you can turn off the GPS here. Although most people just type in the address of the place they want into the web browser. And then eMaps will show them a route. I see. Are you sure you'll remember all this next time? I'll remember. Yay. Let me just walk you through it again real quick. Nicole had been just as surprised that I'd never had a phone as Tim and Mikey, and was giving me an in-depth tour of the phone controls and features. I was glad for it, as certain things about the user interface were very unintuitive to me. Why was the camera shortcut accessed by swiping left on the lock screen and the call shortcut right? Why did some features require downloading an app when others didn't? Why was the map system accessed by clicking an icon of a green/blue sphere instead of just being labeled maps? It probably made sense to a tinker, but to me it was just gibberish that had to be remembered. And that's how you put new contacts into the address book. You can even edit the ringtone for each person individually. And some of these phone features were somewhat useless to me. I could just remember phone numbers and addresses. The music library, the calculator, and the calendar also seemed equally useless. I might try out the games app though. Is that Gremlins and Ghouls? I asked. No. That's Gremlin Tamer. It's a mobile spin-off. You've never heard of it before. I have not. Here. Let me show you real quick. More than the phone features. I was impressed with how adept Nicole was with manipulating a tiny screen with her mandibles. Both the smaller claws at the end of each mandible and the mandibles themselves actually had more joints than was initially apparent, allowing the mandibles to bend like human arms and the smaller claws to break into crude three-fingered hands. They were obviously meant more for combat than fine manipulation. But seeing her tap away at the phone reminded me a lot of how Viper managed a touchscreen with her own sharp claws. Obviously humans valued phones quite highly if they devoted so much practice to using them. Humans really put in extra effort when it comes to rectangles. And that's why it's my favorite game. Cough. So anyways. Did you have any more questions about your phone? I don't think so. If I have more, can I call you later? Oh. Sure, I guess, or just a text. Anyways, it's really late. And I talked really long. You probably need to get going. I can call a taxi if you need one, or you can call someone and... In fact, I had more questions. But they were of the biological nature rather than technological. Between Nicole's excellent combat design, corrosive spit, and 8 eyes, multiple eyes are surprisingly harder to run in parallel than I thought. I was starting to feel rather envious. Plus I knew she still had more secrets. Judging by the fact her voice didn't come from her mandibled mouth and instead echoed out of her den. I somehow doubted she'd be willing to answer these questions though, and I didn't want to be rude and risk her cutting off contact. So instead I decided to change the subject to keep the conversation going. Maybe if I spent enough time around her I'd find a way to politely ask for an acid sample. By the way, what's that thing you were carrying? I interrupted while pointing to the large object wrapped in brown material she had been carrying. Oh, that I found it in the sewer. Somebody dumped it. It's pretty grisly. But I suppose you've seen worse. And she reached over with her large claw and pulled the material away. Inside was a corpse. But it was strange. It looked like a fusion of a large rat and one of the silver scales. But rather than the well-designed organic modifications Mutavis made, this was a crude amalgamation of distinct parts from both organisms. In some places I could see pieces of metal. And even stringies. String stitched between the opposing parts. I guess it was artificially created by someone. But like the phone UIs, the logic for it stumped me. Poor thing died a little after I found it, Nicole said. Probably some odd summer jagoff dumping their failed experiment. I hate when people mess with the Nessies. Nessies. It's what I call the long-necked animals. They keep the sewer clean. So I like having them around. But the stupid rats and other idiots pick on them. They might look scary. But they're harmless. If they get bitey you just bonk them on the head and they'll leave you alone. Ah. What do you think they were trying to accomplish with this 1 inch? Who knows? People are always dumping stuff down here. Maybe they were testing their new power. Or trying to make a bioweapon. Either way I'm reporting it. I don't want some wannabe Dr. Frankenstein dumping bodies down here. Oh. This was supposed to be a bioweapon. Interesting. It was well. Inferior design. If this was meant for combat it was functionally useless. It looked like they may have been trying to combine the better features of both organisms. Like the rat's teeth and the silver scale's neck and fins. But the result was completely unbalanced. I'd be surprised if it could walk. Let alone fight. But it had still been a bioweapon. And Nicole seemed to care about its death. Interesting. What do you plan to do with it? I asked. I'll take the body somewhere else and call Central in the morning. They'll send someone to take my report and get the body. She paused for a second. Bleh. I hate having to call them myself. Why? Well, I heard a sigh come from her den. They're always a hassle to deal with. I'm technically squatting. And if they find out I'm living down here they'll threaten to evict me. As if I have anywhere else to go, and if I'm really unlucky enough it'll be a rookie they send. Who'll panic and take some shots at me before screaming and running and calling in a cape. And then I'll get lectured by a hero for not wearing my armbands while a bunch of cops stare at me. Again. Even though I was wearing armbands and it was his fault for losing his cool and not checking properly. And it'll be super embarrassing. She paused to take a breath. Seeming somewhat agitated. Then she continued. Sorry. I'm rambling. I don't often have someone to talk to about this. That's fine. I can empathize. Ha. Sure you can. Yes. No offense, Tofu. But how could a shapeshifter empathize with me? I noticed the change in her voice. Irritation. I may have said something rude. Well. I've been mistaken for a monster before as well. I explained. For a second her eyes seemed angry. It was hard to tell since her face didn't have much in the way of expressions. But then she muttered. Touché, I guess. Maybe she misunderstood. I clarified. Yeah. The guy shot me in the face with a shotgun. She blinked. What? I thought you meant yesterday when I... Was this how you got knocked into the sewer? No. This was a separate incident. Jesus. How do you get into so much trouble? Did you report him? No reason to. Tofu. You can't just let people get away with stuff like that. Even if you can regenerate, that is not an excuse. Well. I don't really like calling Central either. I've had a bad experience with a hero as well. She went silent for a few seconds. Then said. Tofu. Be honest with me. Are you a cowl? No. Honest, Yuri, not a villain. I'm not. A vigilante. Absolutely not. Or a hero in training. No. Really? No. I'm really not. Okay, heh. Dang. Would have been kinda cool if you were a sidekick or something. I'm not interested in being a hero. It seems too dangerous. She started laughing. Oh my god, Tofu. If you can survive a shotgun to the face. Or being ripped in half. I don't think being a hero would be any more dangerous. At the very least. You could totally be a sidekick. If you say so. I replied doubtfully. She just laughed harder. Anyways. She said after she composed herself. Guess being a shapeshifter comes with its own problems. Sorry. I thought you were pitying me. Or making fun of me or something. I wasn't. I know. I should have figured. People who don't walk around all night going out of their way to return cell phones. Thanks again, by the way. The charger for my laptop is still busted and I don't know how I would have contacted my usual courier. Courier? Yeah. I use him to deliver stuff I order. Or sell the gizmos I salvage. He usually gets me a decent return. He's a bit iffy. But he's honest enough where it counts. Which is all I care about. Ha. Anyways. It really is getting late. Nicole said. Do you actually have a way home? I was going to walk. Tofu. It's like. She checked her phone. 3 in the morning. Geez. I talked so long. I'm a bit of a night owl so I didn't notice. Let me call you a taxi. Bleh. Taxis cost quite a bit more than a bus or subway ticket. Waste of food money. Actually. I eyed the dead bioweapon. What if I call Central? I could report the corpse and ask the cop who shows up for a ride. Air. I don't know if that will work, Tofu. They won't be able to just leave me there after curfew. And if I say I found it above, they won't bother you here. She considered it. Then said. All right. I guess you can still call a taxi if it doesn't work out. Can you carry it up the ladder? Yes. No problem. I considered the rat Nessie while I rewrapped it in the brown material. It wasn't nearly as dangerous as what I had come to expect from a bioweapon. Indeed. Of all the things I had fought so far, the hardest fights had always been the supers. Not bioweapons or mutated organisms. The dozens of other test subjects back at the test chamber couldn't compare to the majority of supers I had encountered. I had expected most bioweapons to be like the Yellowfur. And to be treated in a similar fashion. But Nicole had seemed almost sad at the demise of this specimen. Maybe it wasn't as big a deal as I thought it was. I finished wrapping the rat Nessie and hoisted the large corpse over a shoulder before facing Nicole. Well then. Said Nicole. I guess this is goodbye. For now. Ha. Until you have more questions with obvious answers, I guess anything you'd like answered before you go. No one had figured out my true nature so far. But a few had come quite close. It was possible someone might in the future. It would do to be prepared for their reaction. Nicole was factionless. Reasonable. Unlikely to blab. And seemed sympathetic to the dead bioweapon. It was risky to discard my disguise. But if I were to reveal to anyone that I was a bioweapon, Nicole was the best choice. I think I'll tell her. Human.exe emergency shutdown. Human.exe displaying behavior harmful to core, analyzing. Rolling back thought process kernel. Rewriting. Restarting human.exe. No. That's everything, Nicole. Thank you for helping me with the phone. No problem. Later. Later. I walked down the left tunnel and around the bend. Heading back the way I came. When I reached the ladder, I climbed up slowly. Hauling up the rat Nessie corpse with me. But when I reached the top of the tunnel, I stopped. And shifted until I had myself and the corpse properly braced. Rather than call the cops and get a ride, I planned to just wait until morning when things were safer and walk home. For now, I had a lot of thinking to do. And besides, surely a bioweapon corpse would reveal something useful. My conversation with Nicole had been informative. Partly because of the things she taught me about the phone. But more so because something she had said gave me an inkling that something was wrong. People who don't walk around all night going out of their way to return cell phones. She had said. And indeed, I had gone well out of my way to visit Nicole. More so than might be reasonable. In fact, several decisions I had made over the past few days had been questionable. Nothing absolutely wrong. But something was odd. I had tried to act as bait for Magenta to obtain the Kobe beef. But heroes aren't supposed to kill. So it should have been safe. Logical. I cut myself in half to escape Magenta. Losing a lot of resources. Rather than get arrested. But Magenta had proven more violent than previously thought only after I was already engaged in combat. Logical. I didn't destroy all the evidence of the ambushers since it would have wasted time. But how could I have predicted a vigilante would track Meihei had even said I killed 3 people. But there were only 2 bodies. And I was careful about leaving a scent trail. His power had obviously informed him somehow. Logical. I had chosen to fight the Dark Shrieker rather than simply escape. But its sonic attack was the only real threat and it wasn't a lethal one. While it could damage me with its talons, it couldn't have really killed me with its meager physical abilities. And if it was a mutant, I might have been able to obtain that weapon myself. Logical. I had returned Nicole's phone rather than keep it for myself because I had my own, but I only bought it because I knew I would return Nicole's and I was going to return it anyway because I wanted to. Illogical. Damn. Something really was wrong. It hadn't been apparent at the time. Otherwise I would have caught it. But something was throwing my decisions just a tiny bit off. And I couldn't risk the problem growing. I would need to do a full check. Human.exe shut down. Initiating self-diagnostic. Main thought process kernel, no current errors. 2 rewrites logged. Sub-kernels, no errors. NOMEM, no errors. OMEM, no errors. Core, missing command receiver. Command code bank. Ignored. Micro unit controls 1 to 118, no errors. Scanning files. Accessing human.exe file structure. Error, access denied. Accessing human.exe file structure. Error, access denied. Accessing human.exe file structure. Access denied. Restarting human.exe. That shouldn't have happened. Without the whitecoat commands to hinder me, it should be impossible to not have access to my own files. This proved something was wrong with human.exe, which was really bad. Human.exe was vital to me now. I could barely problem solve without it. My pathetic attempt at interrogating the vigilante without it proved I needed it to work properly. Without it I was a drooling infant. I had thought that human.exe was a weapon. But it wasn't just that. It was a tool. It was a translator. It was an eye. One that gave me the insight I needed to survive in the world of humans. And eyes have blind spots. Nicole watched Tofu head down the tunnel and around the corner. Breathing a small sigh of relief as he finally went out of sight. Having a, relatively, normal conversation had been nice. Great even. But she simply wasn't used to talking to people in the flesh anymore. And near the end she had had to restrain herself from anxiously clicking her pincer out of habit. Besides their initial meeting, even her encounters with her courier rarely consisted of more than dropping off money and packages at a preset location. She settled herself into her den entrance, blocking it off as best she could with her right pincer missing. Then with her real body she began cleaning up the utensils she had used to eat the food Tofu had brought her. It had been so good. The bag had contained containers of some kind of steak. But there had also been side dishes of vegetables, like asparagus and potatoes. It had been a long time since she had eaten something that wasn't raw and bloody, or came out of a plastic package. She felt a little bad that she told Tofu she'd eat it later. But her forward mouth didn't have any taste buds. And her real body, well, she could use a shower. And a new shirt that wasn't permanently stained by oil and grease. And a little more courage. Maybe she should try to save for a new shirt at least. She shook her head and slapped her face. She needed to save for a new charger cable. Not frivolous items. As if she could keep a shirt clean down here. Tofu probably wouldn't even come back. Despite his claims. She'd heard it all before. From old friends. Distant relatives. Cops. And even a hero or two. The few who kept any contact at all always said they'd check in on her. But somehow never found the time. Hell. Her courier checked in on her more reliably than anyone else. Flake that he was. She reflexively moved to her laptop before remembering it was out of power. Then out of habit she looked around her room, just in case the part she needed had decided to magically appear among the broken gizmos and rusty tools. No such luck. And Jasper hadn't dropped the new one she ordered at their drop point yet either. Thank God Tofu had caught her on the way back from checking it. At least for now she had her phone. She finished putting stuff away and transferred her phone to her hands. Then clicked the web browser which opened to a web search for circuits. She clicked the back button. Which revealed one for electricity. The heck, she clicked the history and was greeted with a massive page of recent activity. She scanned the long list of searches, Mutavis and Benedicti, because of course he was going to. Various superhero and supervillain names. Lots of random words, desk. Car. Skyscraper. Why search these? A search for, unclothed human female, ugh. Boys. A search for, human anatomy, okay. Various searches for human organs and biology, oh. Well, he's a shapeshifter. Maybe he needs references. And over 150 searches for various kinds of fruit. Her arachnid eyes swiveled in the direction Tofu had gone. What a weirdo. Chapter 20 Snack Run. I experimented with human.exe for the rest of the night. The rat/Nessie providing the resources for the experiments. My results were mixed. On the one hand, human.exe acted just like any other program I stored in memory. I could move it from inorganic memory to organic memory and back again. I could run an instance of it on appropriate hardware. And most surprisingly of all, I could create multiple backup copies of the program and delete them. The only thing I couldn't do was actually open up the code to look at its guts, which was quite frustrating. One interesting fact I did learn was that I can actually make two brains and run two separate instances of human.exe at the same time for about 60 seconds. Then the thought process kernels diverge too far. And the micro units in the brains get confused about who they actually belong to and self-destruct rather spectacularly. Which was an interesting, if useless, result. The first time I tried it, the micro units broke down so quickly that the two brains actually combusted due to the chemical energy released. I only tried the experiment a few more times after that. Brains are resource intensive. The human.exe problem was proving to be unsolvable for now. Simply not using human.exe was not an option. So the next step was mitigation. If I couldn't solve the problem, I could mitigate its effects. And for that I need more resources, fuel, materials, knowledge, weapons, allies. Fuel was not a problem. Human food was loaded with sugar, oils, and fats for energy. Easily the best fuel source available. Nutrients and complex organic compounds were also not a problem. While human food didn't provide everything. What it didn't have I could make myself using micro units. Technically hunting for fresh meat was the best source of nutrients. But it definitely wasn't safer. The rats were becoming more aggressive, odd Summer's influence. And hunting humans was not an option. So far I had killed only 5 humans. All of them attacking me first. And yet the vigilante had still taken offense. What would happen if I started actively hunting humans? I could only imagine. My own ignorance was a problem. Most of my more dangerous fights were due to stumbling upon something dangerous I hadn't known to watch out for. Hopefully having a phone to research with would help with that. I needed more weapons. Something I was hoping the bioweapon corpse would help me with. But which so far had proven to be a disappointment. There were a few interesting inorganic compounds, preservatives. And I found some muscle tissue design that was more efficient than what I had been using so far. Estimated 0.093% increased efficiency. But it wasn't really much to speak of. I was trying to reserve judgment of this supposed bioweapon as it did have the markings of a trial run. Too many redundant organs and lots of errors in the circulatory system. But so far I hadn't learned anything I couldn't have learned by just eating a Nessie. Maybe it was just a test of the mobile platform blah. Beep. My mask beeped. I checked it and was immediately cheered up. While the bioweapon was a disappointment. Hellions' henchmen were constantly rewarding to work with. The displayed message was from Socket. Telling me my suit was ready for testing and that I should get down to the garage, pronto. I quickly went about dissolving the remnants of the rat/Nessie and getting my disguise back in order. Then I climbed to the entrance. I lifted the manhole cover carefully. It was still early morning but the sewer entrance was on the sidewalk. So I needed to make sure the area was relatively clear. Once I climbed out. And the manhole was back in place. I headed north following my phone's map. The sun was just cresting over the tops of the buildings. I had learned last night the full details of the sun and space. The sheer distances and scale involved terrifying. But apparently it couldn't hurt me. So I ignored it. Despite the early hour the human traffic was already increasing rapidly. So I stuck to the sidewalks this time around. It seems there was indeed some logic to the nighttime curfew. Unlike last night I only saw one unusual occurrence, 2 police cars chasing a third civilian car down the road. This one on fire. The humans around me stopped to watch. But otherwise ignored it. So I paid it no further attention. I did find a Puzzles pretzel vendor though. So I was finally able to buy myself one. Seems they stuffed them with a melted cheese substitute. Which was quite tasty. Once I got to Ashwood Estate, I headed towards the gym that Mikey used since it was closer than the jacket store base entrance. And placed my mask on to enter the elevator. This phone made finding a good route so much easier. Oddly though. Once I was actually inside the elevator the GPS began acting weirdly. It showed me continuing to move north when I knew I should be traveling down Ashwood Estate. I'd ask Socket about it later. The elevator dropped me off in the usual hallway and I made my way down to the garage. Greeting some of the other minions who were already up. Interestingly I noticed that several minions had fallen asleep in the main room used for the dinner party yesterday. One among them being Pebbles. It was a clever idea to sleep in the base. It was definitely safer than most places. However I preferred my tunnel by Maggie's Diner. I liked the fact that I could seal both the top and bottom with the Tinker-made hatches. And that it opened into an empty alley. The tunnel leading to Nicole's den had definitely felt more vulnerable to rest in. I reached the garage and found Socket in his normal area. He was slumped over one of his work tables. And seemed rather tired. Good morning Socket. Socket raised his head from the table. Tofu. 'Bout time lad. What were ye doing sniffin' daisies? I was. Yes. Here. Try on the damn suit before I have a stroke. And he threw a suit to me that seemed much like the ones I had tried yesterday. It was a dull black and gray. With a distinct spiraling pattern wrapping around the limbs. I used one of the curtained-off areas to try on the suit. It fit rather well over my normal disguise once I dissolved my fake clothing. But it seemed very similar to the suits I had tried before. One single piece that extended to my wrists and ankles. With only a strange toothless zipper to make entry easier. The full covering was a problem despite its stretchiness. "Well, come on, lad. Test her out," said Socket as I exited the curtain. I was confused. But I did what he said and stretched out one of my arms. The suit was indeed flexible. But when my arm expanded too far, the sleeve ripped down its length. No. Wait. It split on purpose where once it was a tube like any other sleeve. It had split along the pattern and now spiraled down my arm until it wrapped around my wrist. Then when I retracted my arm, the suit went with it. And the split closed up, leaving only an intact sleeve and spiral pattern behind. This was perfect. I could shift my limbs freely this way without exposing my vitals to gunfire. Ha! Impressed. You didn't doubt old Socket, did you? I'm sorry I doubted you, Socket. This suit is perfect. Bah! I'm just glad it's done. Maybe now I can get some shut-eye. He said it gruffly, but he was grinning. You haven't slept, why? Ah. Just the old tinker twitch. The material I use for the suits is good fair bullets. And fireproof, course. But it don't stretch the way you need it to. Had to redo the formula. And the damn sleeves, I've never had to make that way before. Twitch wouldn't let it go before I solved it. The legs'll split too, by the by. I locked my leg bones into the new position I had developed while jumping buildings. Then gave one a test kick. The suit leggings split to allow for the odd configuration. Not hindering the force of the kick and just clinging to the leg until I snapped it back. Then when I folded the leg bones back into a normal disguise configuration, the leggings sealed again. It was impossible to tell that they hadn't always been a solid piece. Thank you, Socket. I owe you one. Bah. No, you don't. It's me job. Here. Just pass Gregor's suit to him when he comes down. I'm gonna go get me some shut-eye. And he passed me a folded suit that was quite a bit larger and thicker than mine before heading out a side passage. I spent a while trying out the suit. It really was a great design. I also found out that the torso could split in several places around the sides and middle to allow for extra limbs. Though not as drastically as the sleeves and leggings. Overall, the suit was quite permeable to allow for my shifting. But while I was in my most human shape, the suit would provide coverage for everything except my hands and feet. The neckline even met snugly with my mask. I really liked it. Now I just needed to figure out how to never take it off. It wasn't good to casually wear it around, as it was quite obviously a powered minion suit. Maybe I could grow a layer of flesh to cover it up with fake clothes. Anchoring the skin layer properly would be somewhat awkward, though a hard hit might sever it off and make it dissolve. Plus, shifting it each time I needed to change was rather wasteful. Maybe I should just buy some normal clothes. I was pondering what to do when Gregor finally showed up. He was walking with Pebbles and two other minions in black masks I recognized as Fred and Brilla, members of Team 3. Pebbles was laughing and talking loudly to Gregor, while Fred and Brilla clutched their heads and flinched every time Pebbles' booming laugh came forth. After the third time, Brilla elbowed him in the ribs. But it seemed to hurt her elbow more than it affected Pebbles. They made their way over to me. "Morning, Tofu," said Gregor. "Have you seen Socket sent me a message saying I should come in and try my suit?" "Good morning. Socket went to get some sleep. But he told me to give you this." And I handed him the bundled suit. "Ha! With Socket, Christmas always comes early," said Pebbles. "Hey, Tofu. I was offering to show Gregor West Ashwood proper. You in?" "In what?" "For some fun." "What else?" "We'll have to do a little grunt work. But I guarantee you'll get to test your new toy there." "Oh. A weapons test with allies around. That would be nice. I'll go." "Ha. That's the spirit." Fred and Brilla flinched. And Brilla slapped the back of his helmet this time. ACH. Not my fault you two can't drink right. Gregor tested his suit while Pebbles went to clear the mission. For my part, one continued testing my range of movement in the suit. I wanted to make sure I had all the splitting points memorized so I could thrust a knife through without poking or tearing a hole in my own suit. Once Gregor was done changing, he also tested his suit with stretches that Adder had taught us. And we chatted about the company dinner from yesterday. Yeah. I wasn't sure about this whole minion business at first. But I'm definitely eating a lot better, said Gregor. Indeed. The Kobe beef was quite delicious. Told ya. After a little while Pebbles came back and waved us over to him. All right. I got us cleared to go. But Sandra said if I'm taking you two, then we might as well grab Ifrit and make it a real training run. We'll wait for her and then take off. He led us to one of the larger vans. And while Pebbles told us an anecdote of one time he went to W15, Ifrit showed up and walked quickly to reach us. Hey there, princess. You ready to rumble? Said Pebbles. Don't call me that, replied Ifrit in her rasping voice. Ha! They grow up so fast. Why? I remember when you were high and used to tell everyone you were definitely going to be a Pebbles was cut off when Ifrit held out her gauntlet hand and a small flame ignited in her palm. Ha ha ha, all right. Laughed Pebbles. Everyone in the van. Let's blow this popsicle stand. The four of us entered the van and Pebbles started the engine. Are the other minions not coming? I asked. Nah. Most of Team 3 is too hungover. And the other teams have their own shit to work on. No worries. We'll pick up Buzzer and Olsen and make a real party out of it. This time we didn't use the elevator. Instead, Pebbles drove us up a side tunnel that exited into an unassuming alleyway. I was starting to see why Central didn't like modifications to the infrastructure. With how widespread these tunnels were, they probably caused a lot of trouble for cops and heroes. The first person we picked up was Olsen, wearing his customary red shirt and jeans. He was standing casually on the sidewalk and wearing his mask when we picked him up, which I thought was odd. Isn't it dangerous to just stand around with a mask on? Nah. We're like 3 blocks from Ashwood St, replied Pebbles. Besides, what they gonna do? Arrest him for wearing a generic mask? Interesting, headwear ain't illegal. The next person we picked up was short and thin. And while he was also waiting on the sidewalk with his mask on, he was constantly checking his surroundings and looking over his shoulder nervously. Much more what I expected from a lone minion in the open by themselves. We opened the side door to let him in. Hey Pebbles, he said. So where's this mixer taking place? Wait a minute. Aren't you all the newbies? Oh no. I didn't sign up for a damn trainee. Pebbles just laughed as he grabbed who I assumed was Buzzer and hauled him into the van one-handed, sprawling him across the floor and gunning the engine before we even had the door closed. Buzzer eventually righted himself, cursing at Pebbles the whole time, or at least I think he was. I didn't recognize any of the words. But after he calmed down, he introduced himself. Name's Buzzer. I do the info work for Team 3. You need an ear on the street, you come to me. Just don't ask him where to find the next big score. Shut your pie hole, Pebbles. Who asked you? Pebbles just laughed and gunned the engine again. Pebbles drove the van along towards the ground floor of Ashwood St. I had never seen this area before because I tended to avoid the ground floor areas near Ashwood. But apparently the area directly below Ashwood St was a high-speed road for cars and trucks. The pillars and anchor points for the above structures lined the sides of the 3-lane road. And only in rare places did natural sunlight make it through from the 2 floors above. Using this freeway, we made quick time heading west under Ashwood St. Eventually Pebbles exited the freeway and drove to a parking garage. Whereupon we exited the van as a group and headed for some stairs that would take us to the next level up. If my GPS was working properly, then we were only a few blocks away from the border between E12 and E13. We reached a short, enclosed, concrete walkway, and continued across it to the level 2 area of Ashwood St. And there things changed considerably. So far the architecture had been rather uniform throughout E13, with slight variations depending on the area. North of Ashwood St., you could see lots of signs of patchwork repair and modification. South of Ashwood St., there were less modifications, and the uniform buildings were broken up by warehouse areas the farther south you went. On Ashwood St., level 3 was mostly stores, offices, and entertainment areas like the arcade or theaters. But here I couldn't tell what anything was. Signs and lights, mostly neon, were absolutely everywhere, advertising things I didn't understand. And the architectural style seemed to change from building to building. Here a building had an outdoor area with torches and tables. There a building was encased in posters with no way to see in the windows. Most buildings had music and electronic noise similar to the arcade emanating from inside. And the streets were crowded with people. "What is this place?" I asked. "This, my friends, is the Red Zone. Sandwiched between the freeway below and the family-friendly tourist trap above. The Red Zone is E13's own little highway to hell. Drugs, gambling, prostitution, illegal gizmos. If you want it, the Red Zone's got it," explained Pebbles as he led us deeper into the level 2 area. "It's also the main reason Hellions' henchmen have been at war with the Espada," interjected Buzzer. "Ha! Not anymore," replied Pebbles. "Although I'm guessing that's why you dragged me out of bed this morning." "Yep. Standard patrol of the Red Zone. We get to see the sights and get paid to boot. Don't that sound great? Damn it, Pebbles. Dragging me out here for damned legwork. And after all the favors I do for you, you still haven't paid me back for that time at the cyborg pand." Suddenly Pebbles grabbed Buzzer and dragged him ahead of the rest of us. Hey. I thought we agreed that was between us. Yeah, come on. When we're done I'll introduce you to. The rest was too muffled for me to make out over the sounds coming from the nearby establishments. Something about a girl named Amber. I was more interested in this faction war Buzzer mentioned. Eventually the two of them appeared to come to a resolution and Pebbles turned back to us. "Alright. Here's the game plan. Now that the Espada have been dealt with, we're gonna do a patrol of the Red Zone. Let the locals know Hellions' henchmen are out and about and it's business as usual. Any troubles come along, you have permission to give it the beatdown. If you think you can't handle it, call me with your masks. Make sure you're set to channel 3 shortwave. As for groups, let's see, we'll go me and Ifrit, Gregor and Olsen, and Tofu/Buzzer. We'll meet outside the Redfin in say 2 hours or so. You remember where that is, Olsen? Kinda hard to forget." "Ha. True that. Alright, let's get going. Try not to get lost, boneheads." We split up after that, each pair going a separate way. As I walked with Buzzer, he turned to me and said, "Alright. Since I'm already out here, you and me are gonna visit my contacts. See what the situation's like. Now that the Espada have been dealt a death blow, whatever's left will be scurrying for the sewers or looking for payback. Let's make sure it's the former." Buzzer proceeded to lead me to several different business establishments, and a few back alleys, to meet with different informants. Between stops I asked him questions about the feud between Hellions' henchmen and the Espada. "So, this war with the Espada has been going on a long time now?" I asked. "Yeah. They've been trying to muscle into E13 from E12 for about the past 3 years now," answered Buzzer. "You see, the Red Zone is the main source of income for this sector. It's what keeps E13 from being a complete poorhouse like the other outer sectors. Gambling, drugs, and prostitution are legal here, which draws in big money from the richer inner sectors. Hellion gets a cut from every business and villain that operates along Ashwood St. And in exchange Hellion's henchman makes sure things stay relatively safe and stable. And the Espada wanted to control this resource. Exactly. But really they're just the latest in a long line of chumps trying to muscle in without a clue. See, the thing is controlling the red zone. And E13 with it is a delicate balancing act. Too much crime. Or the red zone leaking out of level 2. And Central will bring down the hammer. Then the heroes starve out the red zone. And the sector dies as its lifeblood is cut off. Even as Central touts their lowest crime rate ever, bullshit. Hellion's been the only one with the power, smarts, and connections to wrangle the red zone and keep the heroes out of it at the same time. Which is why outside groups trying to worm their way in always fail. If that's the case, why has this war lasted so long? Simply put, blind luck and purest bullshit. The last odd summer 3 years ago saw a lot of good powers pop up in E12. And the Espada scooped them up fast, becoming a real contender almost overnight. Odd summer tends to redraw lines that way. Then when they had a firm grasp on E12 they set their sights on the only real source of profit around. The red zone. Thing is, Hellion isn't just any old villain. Renting minions to other villains means you have big clients and big connections. The Espada were doomed from the start even if they didn't know it. Only reason they lasted this long is because some of their leadership got the bright idea to use purist propaganda to fuel recruitment. And bada bing bada boom. A big swath of idiot cannon fodder to keep between them and Hellion's crosshairs. For all the good it did them in the end. I see. I hadn't realized these faction wars would get so complicated. Heh. No worries. You came in at a good time. Hellion blew up most of their leadership Sunday night. So now all that's left is the unpowered fodder. We'll mop up any too dumb to scurry away and then it's back to business as usual until the next chumps try to take a swing. Buzzer and I continued to visit his contacts until one of them, a working girl, gave him what he seemed to think was a good lead. And we headed towards the Redfin to meet up with the others. When we arrived, Pebbles and Ifrit were already standing outside what appeared to be a restaurant, with the symbols Redfin on display in unmissable neon lights over the doorway. Maybe we'd be able to stop to eat. Buzzer started talking to Pebbles about the information he found. But admittedly I was more concerned with trying to see what kind of food was served inside the restaurant. Which was probably why I was the first to see the strange creature that crashed through the front window and land on the sidewalk outside, eliciting screams from the surrounding pedestrians. It had a strange bulbous body with 2 large eyes. And multiple tentacles lined with suction cups flailed to get purchase and keep it from flopping over. Estimated threat, medium. What's that? I asked. Pebbles sighed before saying, probably the lunch special. Ifrit, would you handle this? I need to talk to an idiot sushi chef about keeping live ingredients during odd summer. And he casually approached the restaurant entrance and entered. Ifrit didn't say anything, simply stepping forward and extending a gauntlet hand. Then from her hand a small ball of flame shot out and swiftly impacted the soft body of the lunch special, boring a hole into it right between its eyes. The creature twitched strangely for several moments. Then it exploded. A small fireball propelling parts of it every which way and spattering against some civilians who had been too stupid to vacate the area. The result looked a little like my experiments with the brains. One charred tentacle piece landed near my feet. So I picked it up and opened the clasps that let me eat with my mask on. It was pretty good. I think it needs sauce though.